Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto arrived in DxD as a god and the girls abandoned their devil master to worship a true deity? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Uninvited God. The air in the grand hall of the Grimoire estate was a gilded cage, thick with the scent of wilting roses and 100 different expensive perfumes. It was a cloying sweetness that failed to mask the bitter undertone of obligation. Laughter, as brittle as spun glass, echoed off the marble floors and vaulted ceilings, a soundtrack to a celebration no one in Rias Grimoire's inner circle wished to attend. To the hundreds of devils mingling in their finest silks and velvets, this was a momentous occasion, the formal announcement of an alliance, a joining of two great houses. For Rias, it was the final turning of a key in a lock she'd been handed at birth. She stood beside her father, Lord Grimoire, a perfect porcelain doll of a daughter, her crimson hair a banner of her noble lineage. Her smile a carefully constructed masterpiece of polite acceptance. Each handshake, each murmured congratulation, felt like another stone being laid on her chest. She could feel the eyes of her peerage on her, their collective misery a physical weight in the room. Akeno Himahima, her queen and closest friend, stood near a pillar, a glass of crimson wine held in a grip that threatened to shatter the stem. Her usual teasing smile was a thin, tragic line on her lips, her violet eyes holding a storm that promised devastation. She was a tempest bound in a bottle, and the cork was beginning to crumble. Not far from her, Kaneko Tuju, her rook, was a study in compressed fury. She was small, almost lost in the sea of tall, arrogant devils, but her presence was a singularity of cold, silent rage. Her fists were clenched at her sides, and her gaze was fixed on the floor, as if she feared that looking up would mean incinerating the entire room with her glare. She hadn't said a word in 3 hours. She didn't need to. And then there was Asia Argento, her gentle bishop. Sweet, kind Asia, who saw the good in everyone, was visibly wilting. She looked pale and lost, her hands clasped before her in a prayer she no longer believed in. She was a beacon of light in a world of shadows, and Rias had dragged her here only to watch her flicker and dim. Beside her, Ise Hyodo, her newest pawn, stood stiff and awkward in a rented tuxedo that was a size too small. He kept shooting her what he probably thought were reassuring looks, muttering under his breath about the promise he'd made to save her. His earnest, simple-minded devotion was, in that moment, the most painful thing of all. He saw a fairy tale princess who needed a hero. He didn't understand the brutal, soul-crushing politics of hell. He didn't understand that the dragon was not a creature to be slain, but a contract to be signed, a legacy to be upheld. The architect of this misery, Riser Phoenix, moved Thr. Out the crowd like a shark through a school of fish. He was handsome in a cruel, sharp-edged way, his blonde hair perfectly coiffed, his smile a flash of predatory teeth. He exuded an aura of unearned confidence. The casual arrogance of a man who had never been told, no. He was a third-generation pure-blooded devil, an immortal with the power of a phoenix, and he looked at Rias not with love, or even affection, but with the smug satisfaction of a collector who had finally acquired a rare and valuable piece. He reached her side, his hand landing on the small of her back with a familiarity that made her skin crawl. His touch was hot, possessive. Soon, my dear Rias, he murmured, his voice a low drawl meant only for her, yet loud enough for those nearby to hear. The ceremony will be complete. A perfect union of the Grimoire and Phoenix families. They will speak of this day for centuries. He wasn't wrong. They would. Rias forced the corners of her mouth to lift. Of course, Riser-sama. The honorific felt like swallowing dust. Riser's gaze swept over her peerage, and a flicker of contempt crossed his features. He saw them not as her family, but as her assets. His eyes lingered on Akeno, a lecherous smirk playing on his lips. I must admit, I am looking forward to adding your queen to my own peerage. She has spirit. I do enjoy breaking in a spirited woman. His eyes raked over Kaneko and Asia. In fact, all of them will make fine additions to my collection once they are properly trained. The air grew cold. Akeno's mask of indifference finally shattered, a spark of her holy Li. GHTNING heritage flashing deep within her violet eyes. Kaniko's head snapped up, her hazel eyes narrowed into slits. Issei, bless his foolish, heroic heart, stepped forward. His voice was unsteady, but it rang with genuine outrage. Hey, you can't talk about them like that. They're Rias's friends. They're her family. Riser didn't even bother to look at him. He sighed, a theatrical sound of sheer boredom. A lowly pawn speaks out of turn. How droll. He made a flicking gesture with his fingers. Someone teach it some manners. One of Riser's guards, a tall, brutish man in a black suit, moved with a speed that defied his bulk. The crack of his backhand hitting Issei's jaw echoed through the sudden silence. Issei crumpled to the floor, a thin trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. Asia cried out, rushing to his side, her hands glowing with the gentle green light of her healing magic. The music stuttered and died. The chatter ceased. Every single devil in the grand hall turned to stare. Rias felt a surge of cold, crimson fury, the power of destruction coiling in her gut, begging for release. But she was trapped. A grimoire does not cause a scene. A grimoire upholds her obligations. Riser chuckled, a harsh, grating sound that scraped on Rias's raw nerves. You see, he said, projecting his voice for all to hear. This is the natural order of things. The strong rule, and the weak obey. My peerage understands this. They adore me, for I give them strength and purpose. He leaned closer to Rias, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Don't you worry, my love. I will train the disobedience out of your little pets. They will learn their place. It was in that moment, in the suffocating silence of absolute despair, that the world shifted on its axis. It did not begin with a sound. It was not a tremor in the earth or a flash of light in the sky. It began with a feeling. A gentle, pervasive warmth that settled over the room like the first rays of dawn. It was a presence, so vast and yet so impossibly gentle that it took a moment for anyone to register its arrival. The oppressive demonic energy that was the very air of the underworld, the miasma of ambition, pride, and power, it simply evaporated. It was replaced by something clean, pure, and overwhelmingly alive. The ornate chandeliers, burning with eternal hellfire, flickered. Their crimson flames wavered, then bloomed anew. Their color shifting from blood red to a soft, warm gold that bathed the hall in the light of a summer afternoon. The wilting roses in their crystal vases began to straighten, their petals unfurling. Their colors growing vibrant and deep as if they had just been watered with life itself. A man stood in the center of the hall. He hadn't walked in. He hadn't appeared in a flash of teleportation. He was simply there, as if he had been standing in that exact spot for all of eternity, and the rest of the universe had only just now coalesced around him. He was tall, with sun-kissed blonde hair that seemed to drink in the new golden light. His eyes were a startling, impossible blue, deeper than the Mariana's Trench and holding a calm, ancient wisdom that belied his youthful face. He wore simple, practical clothing, a black shirt and pants beneath a flowing white coat with a high collar, unadorned save for a necklace of 9 black, comma-shaped beads. It was not his appearance, however, that held every soul in the room utterly captive. It was his presence. It was an aura of such profound tranquility, of such absolute peace, that it seeped into the very bones of everyone present. The raging storm in Akino's chest calmed. The cold fury in Kaniko's heart thawed. The raw terror that had seized Asia's soul was soothed. The devils were frozen. Their instincts, honed over millennia of conflict and rigid hierarchy, were screaming a single, primal warning. They were in the presence of something that was not just powerful, but fundamentally, terrifyingly other. This was not the energy of a devil, nor the holy light of an angel, nor the conflicted aura of a fallen. This was something else, something primordial. Riser Phoenix, for the first time in his charmed and violent life, felt a sensation he could not name. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was a crushing sense of his own insignificance. As if his immense power, his noble Phoenix lineage, his vaunted immortality, were all nothing more than a child's sandcastle before the coming tide. The stranger's impossible blue eyes swept across the room, passing over the stunned nobles and the powerful lords as if they were nothing more than furniture. His gaze went past Riser, past Rias, and settled upon the small, broken circle of her peerage. He saw the defiant tears in Akino's eyes, the silent pain etched on Kaniko's face. The trembling compassion of Asia as she healed the fallen pawn. He saw them, not as a queen, a rook, a bishop. He saw them as Akeno, as Sharon, as Asia. When he finally spoke, his voice was not loud, but it resonated in the soul of every being present. It was calm, gentle, and carried an authority that no shouted command could ever hope to match. He did not ask who they were, or what was happening. He asked a question, a simple, devastating question that shattered the fragile foundation of their entire world. Are you truly free? The words hung in the air, a physical force that cracked the gilded facade of the party wide open. For Rias's peerage, it was as if a divine light had been cast upon the darkest, most secret corners of their hearts. The contracts they had signed, the servitude they had accepted, the belief that this was the only way to survive, the only way to have a place to belong, it was all laid bare as the cage it truly was. Free. Akeno had never been free. She was a prisoner of her own blood, trapped between the two warring halves of her soul, hating herself for the very power that gave her strength. Free. Kaneko was a prisoner of her past, her own immense power, a curse she had to constantly suppress, lest she become the monster she feared she was. Free. Asia had been cast out by the one institution that was supposed to love her, her only value, her only safety. Found in her complete and utter subservience to another. Tears, hot and unrestrained, finally spilled down Asia's cheeks. Kaneko flinched as if she had been physically struck. Akeno's fully constructed mask of teasing indifference dissolved into dust, revealing the raw, aching vulnerability that lay beneath. Riser, his arrogance warring with a primal instinct he refused to acknowledge, finally found his voice. It was a harsh bark of outrage. Who in the blazes are you? How dare you interrupt my engagement party? Guards, seize him. Do you have any idea who I am? The stranger, Naruto Uzumaki, finally turned his gaze to Riser. There was no anger in his eyes, no malice, not even contempt. There was only a profound, almost imperceptible sadness. I know what you are, he said, his voice still impossibly calm. You are a cage. That was the final insult. Riser's face contorted into a mask of pure, unrestrained rage. Insolent whelp. I am Riser Phoenix, a prince of the underworld. My flames are immortal. They can incinerate gods. You will burn for your impertinence. With a guttural roar, Riser exploded into a column of golden-orange hellfire. The heat was immense, a fizzy cowl blow that scorched the fine tapestries and sent the nearby devils scrambling back in alarm. He was a phoenix, a being of endless regeneration and searing flame, and his power was, by all accounts, absolute. He gathered the fire, compressing it into a miniature sun, a swirling vortex of destruction, and launched it straight at Naruto. Naruto didn't move. He didn't erect a barrier. He didn't chant an incantation or draw a magic circle. He simply raised one hand, palm open, toward the oncoming inferno. The fireball, large enough to atomize half the estate, struck his palm and vanished. It didn't explode. It didn't dissipate. It was simply gone. The air, which had been superheated to the point of shimmering, was now cool and calm. There was not even a lingering scent of ozone. Riser stared, his mouth hanging open. The entire hall was silent, save for the sound of its own collective, indrawn breath. Impossible, Riser stammered. No barrier could. It wasn't a barrier, Naruto said, his voice still maddeningly serene as he lowered his hand. Your fire is an extension of your life force. And all life answers to the source. Driven by a lifetime of unchallenged pride, Riser's fury overrode his dawning terror. He charged, his fists and feet wreathed in his immortal flames, his body an avatar of destruction. I am immortal. You cannot harm me. I will tear you limb from limb. He threw a punch, a blow that could shatter a mountain. Naruto sidestepped it with an economy of motion that was almost insulting. He didn't seem to be moving fast, yet he was always, precisely, where Riser's attack was not. Riser threw another punch, then a spinning kick, a wild, furious flurry of attacks that were all met with the same effortless, placid evasion. He was punching at a ghost, a phantom. A calm blue-eyed smile that was always just beyond his reach. Stand still and fight me. Riser shrieked, his composure utterly stripped away, leaving only the raw, screaming entitlement beneath. Naruto stopped. He stood perfectly still, looking at the raging, flame-wreathed devil before him. You rely on a power you mistake for your own, he said softly. He raised a single finger. You believe your flames grant you life. Let me show you the truth. He gently, almost tenderly, touched the center of Riser's chest. It was not a blow. There was no force behind it, no concussive impact. But the effect was instantaneous and horrific. Riser's flames, his proudest asset, the symbol of his immortal lineage, turned on him. They did not change color or form, but their very nature seemed to have been inverted. The life-giving fire that healed any wound now became a source of endless, agonizing consumption. Riser screamed. It was not a roar of fury, but a raw, animal sound of pure agony that clawed at the ears of everyone present. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest, his body racked with violent convulsions. He was still burning, still regenerating, but the process of regenerate ion itself was now the source of unimaginable pain. His own life force was tearing him apart and rebuilding him, over and over, in an endless, excruciating loop. What did you do to me? He gasped, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it eclipsed his pain. I did nothing, Naruto replied, withdrawing his hand. The compassion in his eyes was, somehow, the most terrifying thing of all. I simply allowed your life to seek balance. It is a lesson you desperately needed to learn. With a final, dismissive wave of his hand, the feedback loop ceased. The pain vanished. Riser was left panting on the floor. His fine suit singed and smoking, his body trembling uncontrollably, his pride not just shattered, but utterly annihilated. He had been defeated, completely and humiliatingly, without a single punch being thrown in return. The hall was so silent you could have heard a soul drop. The assembled devils looked from the whimpering, broken form of Riser Phoenix to the calm, golden-haired M. And who had brought him low with nothing more than a touch and a few quiet words. This was not a battle of power levels. This was a demonstration of a fundamentally different plane of existence. Stray. NGTH they could not even begin to comprehend. Naruto turned his back on the defeated prince, his attention returning to Rias's peerage. He saw the shock in their eyes, but beneath it, he saw something else. A tiny, fragile spark of hope that his presence had fanned into a flame. You do not have to live like this, he said, his voice washing over them, a healing balm on their frayed and wounded spirits. You do not have to be pieces in someone else's game. You are not defined by your contracts, your blood, or the choices that were made for you. He held out his hand. It was not a command. It was not a summons. It was an invitation. I offer you a choice, he said, his blue eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. Not a new master, not a different contract. I offer you sanctuary, a place to discover who you are, not what you are. A chance to be truly free. The choice is yours, and yours alone. Whatever you decide, there will be no judgment from me. Rias was frozen, her mind a maelstrom of conflicting duties. Her family, her name, the stability of the underworld, it all screamed at her to refuse, to denounce this stranger, to salvage this disaster. But her heart, the part of her that suffocated under the weight of expectation her entire life, was screaming a single, traitorous word, yes. But he hadn't offered the choice to her. He had offered it to them. It was Akeno who moved first. She took a single, deliberate step forward, her wine glass falling from her nerveless fingers to shatter on the marble floor. Her eyes, shining with unshed tears, never left Naruto's. Her teasing smile was gone, replaced by an expression of fierce, desperate hope. She had spent her life torn between two worlds, hating herself for what she was. This man, this being, didn't seem to care if she was devil or fallen. He just saw her. I am Akeno Himehime, she said, her voice trembling but clear, ringing with a conviction that shook the very foundations of the hall. And I wish to be free. As the words left her lips, something invisible but absolute snapped. The faint, dark aura of her demonic energy dissolved, replaced by a pure, white light that was tinged with gold. With a soft, chiming sound, the evil peace within her, the black queen that bound her to Rias, ejected itself from her body. It clattered onto the marble floor, the sound echoing like a thunderclap in the silent room. A collective gasp went through the crowd. For a peerage member to consciously, willingly reject their evil peace, it was unheard of. It was a complete and total renunciation of their master, their vows. Their very nature as a reincarnated devil. Akino's decision was the crack in the dam. Kaneko stepped forward next, her small face set with a determination that made her seem as tall as a mountain. Her rook piece followed, falling to the floor beside Akino's. Then Asia, tears of joyous release now streaming down her face, rushed forward, her bishop piece joining the others on the ground with a soft click. From a shadowy corner, Gaspar Vladi appeared, stumbling into the light, his own fear eclipsed by the incredible hope before him. His bishop piece fell, completing the quartet. 4 pieces, 4 souls, laying their servitude bare on the cold marble. They stood before Naruto, not as a peerage, but as 4 individuals who had just taken the most terrifying and liberating step of their lives. Issei stared, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. Akino-san, Kaneko-chan, Asia, what are you doing? You're betraying Bushu. Akino turned to him, and for the first time, her smile was not a mask. It was sad, but it was genuine. No, Issei-kun, she said softly. For the first time, we are choosing ourselves. Rias watched, her heart breaking and soaring all at once. They had chosen freedom, and she, for all her power, for all her titles, was still in her cage. Naruto nodded, a warm, genuine smile gracing his lips. It transformed his face, making him seem impossibly bright. Then let us go, he said. He did not vanish in a swirl of magic or a burst of power. A gentle, golden light simply enveloped him and the 4 who had chosen to follow him. It was not a blinding light, but a warm, inviting glow. Like the first sunrise after a long and starless night. It felt of peace, of hope, of new beginnings. In a single, silent heartbeat, they were gone. The golden light faded, leaving behind a stunned and silent hall. All that remained was a humiliated prince of the underworld whimpering on the floor, a heartbroken crimson-haired king standing amidst the ruins of her future. A confused pawn who had just lost the very reason he fought, and 4 small, black chess pieces lying like discarded toys on the ground. A queen, a rook, 2 bishops. The engagement party was over. The foundations of the devil world, built on a system of masters and servants, of contracts and coercion, had just been shaken to their very core. And in the ensuing silence, every single being in the room, from the mightiest lord to the humblest servant, could feel the terrifying, exhilarating truth of what had just transpired. A god had walked among them. And nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The First Dawn in Sanctuary. The transition was not a violent wrenching through space and time. There was no gut-twisting lurch of teleportation, no searing flash of light. It was more like waking from a long, troubled dream. One moment, they were standing on the cold marble of the Grimoire estate, bathed in a warm, golden light. The next, they were standing on a carpet of soft, impossibly green grass. Bathed in the same gentle glow, though its source was now a sky of soft, twilight lavender. The air was the first thing they truly noticed. It was clean, so fundamentally clean that it felt like their first ever breath. In the underworld, the very atmosphere was thick with demonic energy, a heavy, cloying perfume of power, pride, and ancient conflict. Here, the air was light, alive, and thrummed with a quiet, vibrant energy that sang in their veins. It was the scent of damp earth, of night-blooming flowers, of clean water flowing over smooth stones. It was the scent of life, pure and undiluted. Akino's breath hitched. She felt empty. The familiar, dark thrum of her demonic half, the power she had accepted from Rias, was gone. It was a phantom limb, an absence. So profound it made her feel off balance. In its place, the other half of her soul, the heritage of her fallen angel father that she had so long suppressed and despised, surged not with malice, but with a clean, crisp power like a storm front waiting to be unleashed. For the first time, it wasn't fighting her demonic side for dominance. It was just there. She felt naked, exposed, and terrifyingly vulnerable. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of awe and deep-seated suspicion, darted around, cataloging their new surroundings. They stood in a vast, circular clearing, surrounded by a forest of kolos. Sal trees whose silver-barked trunks soared so high their crowns were lost in the twilight sky. A gentle stream, its water so clear it seemed to be made of liquid crystal, meandered through the clearing, its banks lined with smooth gray stones and glowing moss. Strange, Beautiful flowers with petals of soft blue and silver light bloomed in patches, pulsing with a gentle luminescence that provided a soft counterpoint to the twilight sky. There was no sun, no moon, yet everything was perfectly visible, bathed in this perpetual, peaceful dusk. Kaneko stood rigid, her small fists clenched. She could feel the energy of this place resonating deep within her bones, calling to the Nekomata blood she had always tried to ignore. It was senjutsu, she realized with a jolt. Nature energy, but purer and more potent than anything she had ever imagined. The cold, heavy weight of her rook piece, a constant, grounding presence that had also served as a cage for her power, was gone. She felt lighter, faster, but also untethered. The raw physical power that came with her true nature was simmering just beneath her skin, no longer held in check by the demonic contract. The sensation was both intoxicating and terrifying. Asia was on her knees, her hands pressed to the living grass, tears streaming silently down her face. For her, who had been raised on stories of heaven and then excommunicated for an act of healing, this place felt like a homecoming to a home she had never known. The energy here was not the dogmatic, judgmental light of the church's heaven, which had always felt conditional and cold. This was a warmth that was unconditional, a life force that accepted and embraced without question. It was the embodiment of the loving God she had always wanted to believe in. The ache of Betra, Ying Rias was still a sharp pain in her heart, but it was overshadowed by an overwhelming sense of peace. G. Gasper-kun, Asia asked, her voice trembling as she looked around. Is he? A slight shuff. Ling's sound drew their attention to a large cardboard box sitting incongruously on the perfect grass a few feet away. It was a simple box, the kind used for shipping appliances, with the word, fragile, stamped on its side. I'm okay. A muffled voice squeaked from within. It's very bright out there. Naruto stood before them, his back to the forest, his calm, blue eyes observing their reactions with a gentle empathy. He did not speak, allowing them the time and space to process the seismic shift in their reality. He understood that he had not just moved them from one location to another. He had ripped them from the very fabric of their existence and placed them in a world with entirely new rules. Finally, Akeno found her voice. It was strained, but she forced her old, teasing lilt into it. A familiar shield against the unknown. My, she said, her violet eyes narrowed as she studied him. This is quite an impressive trick. A pocket dimension. It must have taken a great deal of power to create something so stable. She took a step forward, the soft grass barely whispering under her feet. So, I believe it's time you told us. What is the price for this sanctuary? What do you want from us in return for our freedom? It was the question that hung in the air, the transactional nature of their old lives reasserting itself. Everything had a price. Power, safety, Belen, Jing, it was all bought and paid for with servitude. They had abandoned one master. Their instincts told them they had merely been acquired by another. Naruto's expression didn't change. He offered no grand pronouncements, no divine proclamations. His answer was simple, direct, and utterly disarming. Rest, he said, his voice as calm as the crystal stream. Heal, and then, when you are ready, decide for yourselves what you want. That is all. Akeno stared at him, speechless. That was not the answer she had expected. There was no demand for loyalty, no oath of fealty, no hint of a contract. The lack of an expected catch was more unnerving than any threat could have been. But, we have nowhere else to go, Asia whispered, voicing the fear that lay beneath Akeno's suspicion. We can't go back. You will always have a place here, if you choose it, Naruto replied. He turned his gaze toward an empty space near the stream. He raised a hand, and the vibrant nature energy of the clearing seemed to answer his call. The ground softened, and from the rich earth, the silver-barked trees began to grow. They did not erupt from the ground but flowed upwards, their trunks weaving together in a fluid, organic dance. Branches intertwined to form walls, leaves layered themselves to create a living roof, and glowing flowers bloomed around windows that seemed to open like waking eyes. In less than a minute, where there had been only grass, there now stood a simple, elegant house, its lines clean and beautiful, looking as if it had been a part of the landscape for 1,000 years. A gentle, welcoming light bloomed from within its open doorway. This is for you, he said, gesturing to the house. It is a place to be, not a place to serve. He then walked to a nearby tree, its branches heavy with a strange, pearlescent fruit that pulsed with a soft internal light. He plucked 4 of them from their stems and returned, offering one to each of them. Kaneko, her instincts overriding her caution, accepted one. Her eyes widened slightly as she felt the pure life energy contained within the fruit's skin. Food and shelter, Akeno murmured, her mind reeling. Freely given. There is no such thing. There is now, Naruto said simply. He looked toward the cardboard box. You are all safe here. Nothing can harm you. He did not press Gasper to come out, merely including him in the blanket of his reassurance. He then turned and walked toward the center of the clearing. The night is long. Get some rest. We will speak more when the new sun rises. He sat down on the grass, crossing his legs and closing his eyes. His posture one of perfect meditation. His presence, which had been a distinct, warm glow, seemed to melt into the landscape itself, becoming one with the quiet hum of the forest, the gentle flow of the stream, and the soft light of the glowing flora. He was both there and not there, a silent, unmoving guardian. Hesitantly, the 3 girls approached the house. The interior was simple but comfortable, with soft, moss-like beds and a central room warmed by a hearth where a gentle, golden flame danced without any fuel. It was a home, a true home. They were exhausted, the emotional and spiritual whiplash of the day having taken its toll. Asia was the first to succumb, curling up on one of the beds and falling into a deep, peaceful sleep almost instantly. Kaneko chose a corner of the main room. Sitting with her back against the wall, the half-eaten fruit in her hand, her eyes still open and watchful, though the tension had begun to seep from her small frame. Akeno stood in the doorway, looking out at the meditating form of their strange, enigmatic savior. Her mind, always working, always calculating, couldn't find a foothold. He fought without fighting. He commanded without commanding. He offered salvation without a price. It went against every law of nature she had ever known. Devils, angels, fallen, they all operated on a system of power and exchange. What was his angle? What was the end game? The not knowing was a unique form of torture. As the deep twilight of the sanctuary settled into a quiet, peaceful night, a wrongness pricked at the edge of Akeno's senses. It was a subtle discord in the perfect harmony of the dimension, a sour note in a divine symphony. Kaneko felt it too, her head snapping up, her ears twitching as she let out a low, guttural hiss. At the very edge of the clearing, where the forest met the manicured grass, reality seemed to fray. A small, black tear appeared in the air, no larger than a fist. From it, a creature of utter corruption began to pull itself through. It was vaguely insectoid, with too many spindly legs and a chitinous shell that seemed to absorb the gentle light around it. It had no eyes, only a gaping maw filled with needle-like teeth. And its presence radiated an aura of pure, unadulterated void. It was a feeling of anti-life, a hunger that sought not to consume but to nullify. Both Akeno and Oniko instinctively moved to place themselves between the creature and the sleeping Asia, their newfound powers crackling around them. Akeno's hands sparking with golden white lightning, Kaneko's nails elongating into claws as a faint white aura enveloped her. Before they could even formulate an attack, Naruto moved. He hadn't seemed to open his eyes or rise from his meditative pose. One moment he was in the center of the clearing. The next he was standing before the creature. He looked at the abyss herald not with anger, but with a weary, profound sadness. He didn't raise a fist or gather energy for an attack. He simply reached out and placed his hand on the creature's warped carapace. The effect was instantaneous. The creature did not explode or cry out. It simply unraveled. Its corrupt form dissolved into motes of black dust, which were then purified by the sanctuary's air, turning into particles of golden light. The malevolent, void-like energy it radiated was drawn into Naruto's palm, neutralized, and released as pure, clean nature energy, which was then seamlessly absorbed by the grass and trees around him. The entire process was silent, efficient, and absolute. It was not an act of destruction. It was an act of decreation, of a fundamental force correcting an error in its code. Naruto stood for a long moment, staring at the spot where the creature had been. When he turned back to them, the girls saw, for the very first time, a flicker of something beyond his placid calm. It was a deep, ancient concern etched on his features, a shadow in those impossibly blue eyes. "What was that?" Akeno asked, her voice tight. Naruto's gaze swept over the sanctuary, his eyes seeming to inspect the very borders of his creation. "An echo," he said, his voice low and grim. "From a place that should be silent." He looked at them, his expression softening slightly as he saw their fear. "You have nothing to worry about. The walls of this place are strong." He paused, his gaze turning distant, as if looking at a war being fought on a horizon they couldn't see. "But the world outside is sick. And its sickness is growing." He offered no further explanation. He simply walked CK to the center of the clearing and resumed his meditative pose, the silent guardian of their first night of freedom. Akeno and Kaneko exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. They had escaped one cage only to find themselves in a world where things far worse than arrogant devils clawed at the edges of reality. And their protector, the calm, gentle god who had offered them a home, was standing watch against a darkness they couldn't possibly comprehend. Akeno finally stepped back into the house and closed the door, not to shut him out, but to accept the safety he was offering. For the first time, she let the exhaustion claim her, sinking onto a bed. They were free from Rias Grimori. They were free from the expectations of the underworld. But as they slept through their first dawn in Sanctuary, they were beginning to understand that they had just enlisted in a war far older and far more terrifying than the one they had left behind. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Ripples in the Underworld. The golden light faded, leaving behind a silence more profound and damning than any scream. The grand hall of the Grimori estate, a stage for a triumphant political union only moments before, was now the scene of a singular, catastrophic humiliation. The scent of ozone and shattered pride hung heavy in the air. Lord Phoenix was the first to break the spell. His face, a mask of aristocratic disdain just minutes ago, was now a contorted canvas of purple rage. He moved with a speed that belied his age, appearing at his son's side. Riser was still on the floor, trembling, not from injury, but from a deep cellular shock, his immortal fire flickering weakly around him like a dying candle. "Unacceptable." Lord Phoenix's voice was a roar that shook the crystal chandeliers, this Ime making them tremble with raw demonic power. "Utterly unacceptable. An attack on my son. On the heir of the House of Phoenix. In your home, Grimori." He rounded on Rias's father, his eyes burning. "This is an act of war." Lord Grimori, who had been frozen in disbelief, stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Calm yourself, Phoenix. This was an unforeseen incident. An unknown intruder. An intruder you failed to stop." Lord Phoenix spat. "An intruder who assaulted my son and then poached your peerage right in front of you. 4 of them. Your queen, gone. Do you understand the disgrace you have brought upon us all?" He was right. It wasn't just the defeat of Riser. It was the public defection. The evil peace system was the bedrock of their society. It was how they rebuilt their numbers after the Great War, how they maintained their power. A peerage was bound to its king by magic, by contract, by loyalty. For 4 members to spontaneously, willingly sever that bond was not just an anomaly. It was a heresy. It suggested the system itself was flawed, that the loyalty it engendered was a fragile thing that could be broken by a few soft words from a stranger. Rias stood amidst the wreckage of her life, feeling strangely detached, as if she were watching a play about someone else. The 4 black chess pieces on the floor seemed to mock her. A queen, a rook, 2 bishops. Her family, her strength, gone. She could still feel the echoes of their bonds, the sudden, violent emptiness where their presences used to be in the back of her mind. It was a physical ache, a spiritual amputation. They left me," she whispered, the words tasting of ash. It wasn't the political fallout or the humiliation that cut the deepest. It was the simple, brutal fact of their choice. They had looked at her, looked at the life she offered, and then they had looked at a complete stranger and chosen him. The remaining guests, the cream of devil nobility, were now whispering amongst themselves. Their expressions a mixture of shock, fear, and for some of her family's rivals, barely concealed glee. The House of Grimori, one of the 72 pillars, had been made to look weak. Its prized daughter unable to control her own servants. "I will have satisfaction for this, Grimori," Lord Phoenix snarled, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. My son's honor will be restored. Your house will pay. Before Lord Grimoire could respond, the oppressive atmosphere in the room changed. The raw, chaotic anger of Lord Phoenix was instantly smothered, replaced by an aura of such immense, overwhelming power that every devil in the hall, from the lowest servant to Lord Phoenix himself, instinctively bowed their heads. It was a pressure that demanded submission, a power as vast and deep as the underworld itself. Two figures appeared in the center of the room, not with a flash, but with a quiet shift in reality, as if the space had simply bent to their will. The first was a woman in a French maid's uniform. Her silver hair braided, her expression impassive and cold. Graphia Lucifuge, the silver-haired queen of annihilation, the strongest queen in the underworld. The second was a handsome young man with crimson hair even more vibrant than Rias's own. He wore a simple, elegant suit, and his face held a gentle, almost lazy smile. But his eyes, the same shade of violet as his sister, held an ancient, unassailable authority. Sears Lucifer, one of the four great Satans, the Devil King who ruled them all. Lord Phoenix, Sears said, his voice deceptively light, yet it oozed through the tension like a hot knife through butter. Raising your voice at your host is hardly a becoming trait for a noble of your stature. Lord Phoenix stiffened, his rage instantly tempered by a healthy dose of fear. Lord Lucifer, my apologies, but you did not see what transpired. An attack, a flagrant insult to my house. Sears' gaze swept the room, taking in the trembling riser, the 4 chess pieces on the floor. And finally, the shattered expression on his little sister's face. His smile faded, replaced by an unreadable, serious expression. I believe I am aware of the situation, he said. He looked at Graphia. Please ensure our guests depart safely. The party is over. Graphia nodded once. With a wave of her hand, shimmering teleportation circles appeared beneath the feet of every guest, and in a silent, orderly fashion, the grand hall was emptied, leaving only the Grimoire family, the Phoenixes, Issei and Kiba, Graphia, and Sears. Now, Sears said, his tone shifting from that of a king to that of a concerned brother as he walked towards Rias. Rias, tell me everything, from the beginning. Later, in the quiet solitude of her personal study, the story had been recounted. Lord Phoenix had been sent away with a promise of a full investigation, a promise backed by the unassailable authority of Sears himself. Rias paced the room like a caged lioness, the adrenaline of the confrontation fading, leaving behind a raw, gnawing grief. This room was filled with them. Akino's favorite tea set sat on a side table. A half-eaten bag of sweets Kaneko had been nibbling on lay on the mantelpiece. A vase of fresh flowers that Asia had arranged that morning stood on her desk. Every object was a fresh stab of betrayal. How could they? She demanded, her voice cracking as she turned to her brother. I gave them a home. A family. I saved them. Asia was an outcast. Kaneko was alone. Akino was a fugitive from her own kind. And they just threw it all away for a man they just met. Issei, his jaw swollen and bruised, stood awkwardly by the door with Kiba. He tricked them, Bushu. He insisted, his own pain and confusion evident. He must have used some kind of mind control. Akino-san and Kaneko-chan would never leave you. Sears sat in an armchair, his fingers steepled before him, his expression grim. Graphia stood silently behind him. He had listened to Rias's account without interruption, his focus unnervingly absolute. He hadn't cared about the stranger's appearance or his philosophy. He had focused on the mechanics. You said he didn't use a magic circle, Sears said, his voice cutting through Rias's emotional tirade. There was no incantation, no energy signature you recognized. Rias shook her head, forcing herself to focus. No, nothing. He was just there. His power, it wasn't demonic, or holy, or draconic. It felt like the world itself. Like the air and the earth. And when he defeated Riser, Sears continued, his eyes narrowed in thought. He didn't overpower his flames. You said he turned them against him. He touched him, Rias confirmed, a shiver running down her spine at the memory. That's all he did. He just touched him, and Riser's own regeneration became a weapon of torture. Sears fell silent for a long moment. Graphia's impassive mask finally cracked, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. The ability to invert the fundamental properties of a clan trait like the Phoenix Flame was not just high-level magic, it was conceptually impossible by their understanding of the laws of the universe. But the most disturbing part, Searsex said, his voice low, is the evil pieces. For them to be rejected, willingly, by the host, the bond between a king and servant is absolute. It is woven into their very souls. To sever it would require the consent of the king, the death of the servant, or an outside force that can simply unwrite the contract. Graphia finished, her voice a chilled whisper. The implications of that statement hung heavy in the room. The entire social and military structure of the Devil World was built on the foundation of the evil peace system created by Ajuka Beelzebub. It was their greatest asset, the tool that had saved them from extinction. An entity that could nullify it at will was not just a threat to a single noble house. It was a threat to their entire civilization. I want them back, Rias said, her voice dropping to a low, determined growl. The grief was still there, but it was now being forged into the cold, hard steel of resolve. He brainwashed them. He took my family, and I will get them back. Searsex looked at his sister, seeing the fire of a grimoire in her eyes. He knew that telling her to stand down was not an option. And perhaps, it wasn't the right one. This being, Searsex declared, standing up, his regal authority returning in full force. This, Naruto Uzumaki. As Riser's attendants heard his name, he represents a threat of an unknown magnitude. His ability to manipulate life force on a conceptual level, his unknown energy source, and most critically, his power to negate the evil peace system, makes him a potential crisis on the level of the old Satan faction or the Chaos Brigade. He walked over to a map of the underworld hanging on the wall, though his gaze seemed to be looking far beyond it. Therefore, he said, turning back to face them, his decision made. I am officially classifying this individual as an SSS-class threat to the stability of the underworld. All factions will be put on high alert. He then looked directly at Rias. Rias, your personal feelings are understandable. But this is now a matter of state security. I am officially sanctioning your peerage to investigate this matter. Your new primary objective is to locate this man and the four who followed him. You are to observe, gather intelligence, and under no circumstances are you to engage him directly without my authorization. Is that understood? It was a test. He was giving her a mission, a purpose, channeling her anger into a productive, controllable path. Rias stood taller, her back straightening. The lost, heartbroken girl was gone, replaced by the king of the Grimoire peerage. I understand, brother. Good, Searsex said. He gave her a rare, small smile, a mixture of pride and concern. Ajuka will be analyzing the energy signature from the hull. Seraphal will monitor for any similar magical phenomena across all territories. I trust you to handle the initial fieldwork. You have a connection to them that none of our other operatives possess. His meaning was clear. Her pain was now her greatest weapon. After Searsex and Graphia departed in a flash of crimson light, Rias turned to her two remaining pieces. Kiba, ever the loyal knight, placed a hand on his heart and bowed. Issei, his earlier foolishness replaced by a grim determination, slammed his fist into his palm. We'll find them, Bushu, Issei said, his voice raw. I swear it. I'll get stronger. I'll master my boosted gear. And I'll drag them back, kicking and screaming if I have to. Rias looked at the 4 chess pieces she had picked up from the floor, clutching them in her hand. They felt cold, inert, dead, but she refused to accept it. They were not gone. They were lost, and she would be the one to find them. They are not just property, Issei. They are not trophies to be won, she said, her voice dangerously calm. They are my precious servants. My family. This man, this false god, he has poisoned their minds. He has offered them a fantasy at the cost of their reality, their loyalty. She closed her hand, the sharp edges of the pieces digging into her palm. We will find him, she vowed, her eyes burning with the crimson light of destruction. And I will show them the truth. I will remind them of who they belong to. I will bring my family home. The ripples of Naruto's arrival had begun to spread, and in the heart of the underworld, they had Jew Saint coalesced into a tidal wave of crimson-haired fury. The hunt was on. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Weight of Choice. Weeks bled into one another in the perpetual twilight of the sanctuary. Time here did not march with the relentless, ticking precision of the outside world. It flowed, a gentle current guided by instinct rather than a clock. They slept when they were tired, ate when they were hungry. And for the first time in their lives, they simply were. The absence of a master was a stranger sensation than any of them had anticipated. There were no orders to follow, no missions to prepare for, no daily schedule to adhere to. This complete and utter freedom was, in its own way, paralyzing. They had been defined for so long by their roles, queen, rook, bishop, that the sudden instruction to simply be themselves left them feeling like actors who had forgotten all their lines. Slowly, tentatively, they began to fill the silence with new routines. Asia, whose heart had always been drawn to nurturing life, became the unofficial caretaker of the sanctuary's unique flora. She discovered that the glowing flowers responded to kindness, their light brightening with a happy hum when she tended to them. She learned to coax the pearlescent fruit from the trees and found a simple, profound joy in providing for her new family, a choice made freely each day. Gasper, emboldened by the absolute lack of judgment in this new home, began to spend more and more time out of his cardboard box. He was still shy, still prone to hiding behind the nearest silver-barked tree if someone looked at him too suddenly. But the crippling fear that had once defined his existence was beginning to recede. He and Asia formed a quiet bond, often sitting by the crystal stream for hours, talking in low, gentle voices. Two fragile souls finding strength in each other's company. Kaneko became an explorer. Her Nekomata senses, no longer suppressed by Rook's seal, were vibrantly alive. She could feel every root system under the grass, hear the whisper of the wind through the leaves of the canopy a mile above, and scent the subtle changes in the air that signaled the waking, or sleeping, cycles of the sanctuary. She would vanish into the colossal forest for hours, moving with a silent, fluid grace she was only now rediscovering. She was relearning the shape of her own body, the extent of her own power. Far from the prying eyes and expectations of the devil world, Akeno, however, struggled the most with the peace. She had spent her entire life in a state of internal war. Her smile was her shield, her teasing nature was her sword, and her carefully controlled power was her armor. Here, there were no battles to fight, no one to disarm with a flirtatious comment, no one to keep at a distance. The silence of the sanctuary was deafening, forcing her to listen to the thoughts she had spent years trying to drown out. She tried to make herself useful, attempting to cook meals in the living house's hearth, a task she had always left to others. The results were often comically disastrous: bread that could be used as a doorstop, soups that were inexplicably spicy, and a memorable incident involving an exploding fruit that painted one wall in a sticky, luminescent purple goo. Through it all, she maintained her teasing facade, laughing off the failures, but a quiet frustration simmered beneath the surface. She was a queen without a king, a warrior without a war, and she felt utterly, terrifyingly adrift. Naruto remained a figure of serene consistency. He did not act like a lord or a god demanding worship. He acted like a caretaker. He would spend long periods in meditation, his presence merging with the sanctuary itself, a silent, watchful guardian. Other times, they would find him tending to the stream, clearing a fallen leaf, or simply sitting and watching them with a gentle, encouraging smile. He never gave them orders. He never offered unsolicited advice. He simply provided the space for them to heal and waited, with the infinite patience of a mountain, for them to be ready to take the next step. His only deviation from this placid routine was his nightly ritual. As the lavender sky deepened to a shade of indigo, he would walk to the edge of the clearing, his back to the house, and stand watch. They didn't know what he was watching for, but after witnessing him unmake creature that had torn its way into their reality, they had their suspicions. He was a protector, standing between their fragile new peace and a sickness they could not comprehend. This silent, vigil was the only reminder that the world outside their perfect prison was still waiting. The breaking point for Akeno came on a night that was no different from any other. She fell asleep to the gentle hum of the sanctuary and found herself in a place of cold, unforgiving stone. She was a child again, small and alone, standing in the throne room of Grigori. Her father, Barakiel, stood before her, his back turned. his 10 black wings casting a shadow that swallowed her whole. Whispers echoed from the shadows, the cruel taunts of the other fallen angels. Half-breed, filth, an abomination born of sin. Look at her, the vice-governor's shame. In her dream, she cried out to him, Father. He turned, but his face was a featureless void. When he spoke, it was not his voice, but a chorus of every harsh word she had ever heard. You are a mistake. Your holy blood is tainted by the filth of a devil. You are nothing. Then the dream shifted. She was in the Grimoria state, but it was dark, empty. Rias stood before her, her crimson hair like blood in the gloom. You are my queen, Akeno. You belong to me. Your power is mine to command. The Grimoire crest burned on the back of her hand, a brand of ownership. Rias's face melted away, replaced by Riser Phoenix's leering smirk. A fine addition to my collection. I will enjoy breaking you. A primal scream built in her chest, a hurricane of rage and self-loathing. I am not a thing to be owned. The world of her dream cracked, and from the fissures, brilliant, destructive golden lightning erupted. It was her lightning, the holy power she had inherited from her father. The power she had always hated, always suppressed, because it was a reminder of the side of her that had been rejected. She unleashed it all, a torrent of divine fury meant to annihilate the ghosts that haunted her. Akeno awoke with a strangled gasp, sitting bolt upright in her moss-soft bed. The phantom sensations of the dream still clung to her, the cold stone, the burning brand. The searing heat of her own power. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silent house. The air was thick with the smell of ozone. She looked down at her hands. They were crackling with golden energy. Arcs of pure, holy lightning dancing between her fingers, uncontrolled and violent. Where they touched the living wall of the house, they left scorched, black marks, like angry scars on a living thing. The house, an extension of Naruto's own life force, seemed to groan in pain. Panic seized her. This was it, the proof. The part of her she hated most was a destructive, uncontrollable force. She was a monster, just as they had always said. She scrambled out of bed, her breathing ragged, trying to suppress the energy, to force it back down into the cage she had built around her heart. But the more she fought it, the more violent it became, lashing out and charring a line across the floor. No, 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 she whimpered, tears of frustration and fear blurring her vision. The door to the house opened silently. Naruto stood there, his blue eyes not holding anger or disappointment, but an infinite, soul-deep sadness, as if her pain were his own. He didn't look at the scorch marks on the wall. He looked at her. Let it out, Akeno, he said softly. I can't, she cried, her voice breaking. It will destroy everything. It's ugly. It's a curse. The energy is not the curse, he replied. His voice a calm anchor in her raging storm. The cage you have built for it is. A river that is dammed will always overflow. It does not mean the water itself is evil. He took a step inside, seemingly unafraid of the wild energy arcing from her body. Come with me. Don't fight it. Just guide it. He turned and walked back outside. His calm confidence was so absolute that, for a reason she couldn't fathom, she trusted him. Clenching her fists, the lightning writhing around her arms, she followed him out into the twilight clearing. He led her away from the house, toward the edge of the forest, where a single, ancient-looking tree stood apart from the others. Its bark was gnarled and silver, and its branches were bare, as if it were sleeping. Here, Naruto said, placing a hand on the ancient trunk. This one is old and strong. It can bear the weight of your storm. Don't hold back. Release all of it, your pain, your anger, your fear. Give it all to the tree. Akeno stared at him, then at the tree. The idea was madness. Unleash this destructive, hateful power. But the lightning was burning under her skin, demanding release, and the look in his eyes held no trace of doubt. Hesitantly, she raised her hands toward the tree. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and for the first time in her life, she let the dam break. She screamed, a raw, cathartic sound of a soul's agony. And the golden lightning exploded from her. It was not the controlled, precise weapon she wielded in battle. It was a chaotic, elemental torrent of pure, unadulterated power. It struck the ancient tree with the force of a divine thunderbolt, the air cracking with its passage. She poured everything into it, the memory of her mother's death, her father's abandonment, the jeers of the fallen. The suffocating obligations of being a devil's queen. She emptied the darkest corners of her heart, feeding the storm until she was utterly spent, collapsing to her knees, panting and sobbing. Her body trembling with the aftershock. The clearing was silent. The ancient tree was still standing, though its silver bark was now blackened and scorched, smoke curling from its bare branches. Akeno stared at her handiwork, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. She had done it. She had destroyed something beautiful. She had proven she was a monster. You see, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Destruction. It's all I am, is it? Naruto asked softly. He had not moved from his spot beside the tree. He placed both his hands on the scorched trunk. A soft, green light, the color of new spring leaves, enveloped his hands. The vibrant life energy of the sanctuary, the same power that had grown the house, now flowed from him into the wounded tree. He wasn't just healing it, he was acting as a catalyst. A conduit, taking the raw, violent energy she had just unleashed and giving it purpose. Power is just power, Akeno, he said, his eyes closed in concentration. It is the wielder who gives it a name. You called your power a curse, so it cursed you. You called it destruction, so it destroyed. What if you gave it a new name? As he spoke, something miraculous began to happen. The black scorch marks on the tree began to fade, not vanishing, but changing. From the charred bark, new buds began to sprout with impossible speed. But they were not normal buds. On one side of the tree, the branches bloomed with flowers of a deep, velvety black, their petals as dark as a devil's wing at midnight. On the other side, they bloomed with flowers of a brilliant, radiant gold, their petals crackling with a soft, contained light, the same color as the holy lightning she had just unleashed. The tree, once bare and now scarred, was reborn, a breathtaking tapestry of perfect, impossible balance. A tree of darkness and light, each half distinct, yet growing from the same trunk, drawing life from the same roots. Akeno stared, her tears stopping as she took in the impossible sight. It was beautiful, so painfully, heartbreakingly beautiful. Your heritage is not a curse, Naruto said, withdrawing his hands and turning to face her. It is not a war to be fought. It is a balance to be found. You are Akeno Himehime, not a fallen angel, not a devil. You are a daughter of shadow and a daughter of light. You are both, and that is what makes you uniquely, beautifully strong. He offered her a hand. As she looked at it, then at the blooming tree, then back to his calm, accepting eyes, a profound shift occurred deep within her soul. The hatred she had carried for herself for so long, the heavy, crushing weight of it, began to lift. For the first time, she didn't see the two warring halves of her soul. She saw herself, whole. She took his hand, and he helped her to her feet. The devotion she felt in that moment was purer and stronger than any loyalty a chess piece could ever command. He hadn't just saved her from a political marriage. He was saving her from herself. From the doorway of the house, Kaneko had watched the entire exchange in silence. She had seen Akeno's breakdown, had felt the raw, untamed power of the lightning, and had witnessed the impossible miracle of the blooming tree. She watched as Naruto led a calmer, strangely peaceful Akeno back towards the house, speaking to her in low tones. Later, when the others had returned to their beds, Kaneko slipped out. She found Naruto sitting by the crystal stream, his gaze fixed on the water as if reading a story in its endless flow. She approached him with her usual silent steps, but he spoke without turning. You are not a monster. Sharon. He used her true name. The name she had abandoned, the name that was tied to her sister, to the trauma, to the power she feared. Hearing it spoken so calmly, so matter-of-factly, sent a jolt through her. She stopped behind him. You don't know that, she said, her voice flat, betraying none of the turmoil his words had caused. You don't know what I am. What I can become. I know you are afraid, he replied, finally turning to look at her. His blue eyes were not pitying. They were understanding. You have sealed away a part of yourself for so long, you have forgotten its true shape. You only remember the fear. The last time I used my full power, people got hurt, she stated, the memory a cold stone in her gut. My sister, she lost herself to it. It drove her mad. It's in my blood. Was it the power that drove her mad? Naruto asked, his question simple but incisive. Or was it the pain she was in that twisted how she used her power? He patted the grass beside him. Show me. Quote. Kaneko stiffened. What? Show me the part of you that you believe is a monster, he said again, his voice unwavering. I am not afraid. And you have no reason to be, either. Not here. She stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of doubt and a desperate, fledgling hope. Rias had given her a place to stay, had given her the power of a rook to keep her stable. But she had always treated Kaneko's true nature as a condition to be managed, a danger to be contained. No one had ever asked to see it. No one had ever offered to look upon the monster and not flinch. Slowly, hesitantly, she sat down beside him. The air was calm, the only sounds the gurgle of the stream and the soft hum of the glowing flowers. Naruto did not press her. He simply sat in comfortable silence, his presence an unshakable mountain of acceptance. He was creating a space for her, a sanctuary within the sanctuary, where it was safe to be vulnerable. Minutes stretched by. Finally, awing on a sliver of the courage she'd seen in Akeno, Kaneko closed her eyes and let go of the ironclad control she maintained at all times. It was a subtle transformation. A pair of white, feline ears, sensitive and expressive, sprouted from her hair, twitching slightly at the sounds of the night. Then, from the base of her spine, not one, but two long, elegant white tails materialized, swishing gently through the air. Her pupils dilated, becoming sharp, vertical slits. A faint, white aura of pure senjutsu, her life force, enveloped her. This was her true form as a Nekomata. This was the monster she had kept hidden. She waited, her entire body tensed for the inevitable recoil, the flicker of fear, the judgment. It never came. She opened her eyes and looked at Naruto. He was watching her, and his expression held no fear, no surprise. There was only a soft, genuine smile on his face. He reached out, not with a sudden movement, but slowly, giving her ample time to pull away. He didn't touch her ears or tails. The parts she felt made her an oddity. He gently placed his hand on her head, right between her new ears, and simply rested it there. His touch was warm, comforting, and utterly accepting. In that single, simple gesture, he conveyed more than 1,000 words of reassurance ever could. I see you, all of you, and you are not a monster. A single, hot tear escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek. It was the first she had shed in years. She didn't let out a sob or break down. She just sat there, under the gentle weight of his hand, as a decade of fear and self-loathing began to dissolve under the warmth of his unconditional acceptance. The choice they had made in that grand hall had been a leap of faith, a desperate grasp for a half-glimpsed hope. But here, in the quiet twilight, under the branches of a tree born of conflict and by the side of a god who healed souls with silence, their choice was being forged into something far stronger. It was no longer a decision. It was a conviction. They hadn't just found a sanctuary. They had found a home. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. A stray's plea and a king's fury. The sanctuary was no longer just a refuge, it was becoming a home. The passage of time had smoothed the sharp edges of their trauma, replacing fear with a quiet, burgeoning confidence. Akeno discovered a new artistry in her power. She would stand by the tree of light and shadow, her hands weaving intricate patterns of golden lightning and dark demonic energy. It was no longer a battle for control but a dance of integration, a breathtaking display. Why of the balance she had found within herself. The teasing smile she wore was no longer a mask. It was genuine, a reflection of a soul that was finally at peace with its own nature. Kaneko, or Sharon, as she was slowly, hesitantly, beginning to call herself again, no longer hid. Her white ears and twin tails were a common sight, twitching with curiosity or swishing with contentment as she basked in the twilight glow. She had found that the immense senjutsu of the sanctuary did not threaten to overwhelm her, but instead acted as a placid sea upon which her own power could float. She was still quiet, but her silence was no longer born of suppressed rage, it was the comfortable silence of a predator at rest. Asia had blossomed. Her innate kindness, once a source of vulnerability that others had exploited, was now her greatest strength. She had become the heart of their small family, her gentle presence a constant source of comfort. She learned to communicate with the living essence of the sanctuary, her healing extending beyond flesh and blood to the very spirit of the place. Her hands, which had once trembled in fear, were now steady with purpose. Even Gasper had found a tentative bravery. He spent entire days out of his box, often helping Asia with her glowing flowers or engaging in quiet, halting conversations with Sharon. The world, he was discovering, was not nearly as terrifying when it wasn't actively trying to hurt him. Naruto watched them, his presence a constant, reassuring backdrop to their recovery. He saw their healing, their laughter, the new, stronger bonds they were forging. But he also saw the invisible walls of the sanctuary closing in around them. This place was a perfect, pristine haven, but it was not the real world. Freedom, he knew, was not found in a gilded cage. No matter how beautiful or safe, it had to be tested, lived, and affirmed in the world that had tried to break them. He found them all gathered by the crystal stream one afternoon. Watching Sharon demonstrate her newfound agility by leaping between the high branches of the silver-barked trees. "You have all grown strong," he said, his voice drawing their attention. There was a new note in it, a sense of gentle purpose that made them all focus. "You have begun to heal the wounds that were inflicted upon you. Thanks to you, Naruto-sama," Asia said, her voice filled with sincere gratitude. He inclined his head, accepting her thanks but gently deflecting the honorific. "The strength was always yours. I only provided the soil for it to grow. But roots that are never tested by the wind do not grow deep. It is time for you to remember the world you left behind." Akino's smile tightened slightly. "Return? Why would we want to do that?" The unspoken sentiment was clear. Why would we ever want to go back to a world that despised us? "Because you are not fugitives," Naruto said, his gaze sweeping over each of them. "You are not hiding. You have chosen a new path, and you have the right to walk it with your heads held high. Your past is a part of your story, you do not need to run from it." He paused, his blue eyes filled with a calm resolve. "We are going to Kuo Town." The name of their old home landed amongst them with the force of a physical object. It was a place of painful memories and lingering obligations, the epicenter of the lives they had abandoned. Liquor of the old fear returned to Asia's eyes. Sharon's ears flattened against her hair. But as they looked at Naruto, at the unshakable confidence in his posture, they found his certainty was more potent than their fear. If he said it was time, then it was time. The return was as gentle as their departure, yet the sensory shock was immediate and jarring. One moment they were breathing the pure, life-infused air of the sanctuary. The next, they were standing in a secluded corner of a Kuo city park, assaulted by a cacophony of sensations. The roar of traffic, the distant wail of a siren, smell of exhaust fumes and street food, the chaotic, discordant hum of thousands of human lives. It was a brutal symphony after weeks of perfect, tranquil harmony. They were dressed in simple, human clothing that Naruto had created for them, but they still felt impossibly conspicuous. Akino found herself instinctively scanning the crowds, her senses on high alert. Sharon's tails were tucked tightly out of sight, and her ears were hidden beneath a beanie, but she was rigid with tension, every loud noise making her flinch. Asia stayed close to Naruto, her eyes wide with an apprehension that was a stark reminder of her former self. "It's so loud," Gasper whispered, peeking out from behind Akino's back, his own oversized hoodie pulled low. "This is the world as it is," Naruto said calmly, seemingly unaffected by the sensory overload. "It is messy, chaotic, and beautiful. Come, let us walk." He led them not towards the bustling town center or their old school, but along the quieter paths of the park. Heading towards the more neglected outskirts of the city. He was allowing them to acclimate, to feel the pulse of this world without being drowned by it. As they walked, they began to relax, the initial shock fading. Akino even found a small, nostalgic smile touching her lips as they passed an ice cream vendor, a memory of a simpler time with Rias flickering in her mind. It was a dull ache, not a sharp pain. Progress. It was Sharon who sensed it first. Her head snapped up, her cat ears twitching beneath her beanie. "Something's wrong," she hissed, her voice a low growl. Akino and Asia felt it a moment later, a spike of demonic energy, weak and frantic, laced with terror. It was followed by a surge of something else, the cold, sterile, and unforgivingly sharp signature of holy power. The two energies were clashing nearby, a discordant shriek in the supernatural spectrum. Naruto's calm expression hardened with purpose. "This way," he said, turning and heading towards an ove. R-grown path that led to the abandoned church on the hill, a place of bitter memories for Asia. As they drew closer, they could hear the sounds of a conflict, the crackle of energy, a panted snarl of defiance, and the cold, arrogant voices of men. They broke through the trees into a clearing and the scene unfolded before them. A young devil, barely more than a boy with scraggly wings and torn clothes, was backed against the crumbling wall of the old church. He was clearly astray, injured and terrified, with a deep gash in his side that bled sluggishly. Cornering him were 3 men in the severe, dark coats of exorcists. Their faces were grim, set in lines of zealous righteousness, and their hands held swords of pure, blinding light. "Abomination," the lead exorcist said, his voice dripping with sanctimonious venom. "Your existence is a blight upon this world. It is our sacred duty to purge you." I haven't done anything," the stray devil cried, his voice breaking with fear. "I was just hungry. Please, just let me go." "Your crime is what you are," another exorcist sneered, taking a step forward. "There is no redemption for your kind. Only purification." He raised his light sword for a final, cleansing strike. "Stop." The voice was not loud, but it rang with an unshakable conviction that made all 3 exorcists pause. It was Asia. She had stepped forward from the trees, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her gentle face set with a fierce, protective resolve that none of her former comrades had ever seen. The timid girl who had once flinched at her own shadow was now standing between a condemned soul and his executioners. The lead exorcist turned, his eyes narrowing as he took in the newcomers. His gaze swept over them, and a cruel smirk touched his lips. "More strays. It seems our hunt today will be a bountiful one. You've come to the right place to die." He and his comrades turned their attention from the cowering stray to the more immediate threat, raising their holy weapons. "Your light is born of dogma," Naruto said, his voice cutting through the air, devoid of threat but heavy with absolute authority as he stepped in front of Asia. "It carries judgment, but no compassion. It is hollow." Quote, "Blasphemy," the lead exorcist roared, enraged by the calm dismissal of his sacred power. "You will be scoured from existence for those words." He lunged forward, his sword of light a searing blur aimed directly at Naruto's heart. Naruto didn't move to block or dodge. He simply stomped his foot upon the ground. Once, the earth itself responded. The solid G, round beneath the charging exorcists instantly turned into a thick, grasping mud, their forward momentum stolen as they sank to their knees. The ancient, gnarled trees that surrounded the clearing bent and twisted, their branches weaving together with impossible speed to form a living, impassable wall around them. A thick, white mist, cool and damp, rose from the ground, swirling and obscuring their vision in seconds. The exorcists were trapped, disoriented, their holy light swallowed by the impenetrable fog. They swung their swords wildly, shouting in confusion and rage, but they were stricken. G at nothing but phantoms and shifting trees. There was no malevolence in the attack, no killing intent. It was simply a statement of fact. You cannot pass. You are not welcome here. It was the world itself ejecting them. "What is this sorcery?" one of them yelled into the fog. "This is not your land to cleanse," Naruto's voice echoed from all around them, calm and implacable. "Leave." Faced with a power that so casually warped reality, a power they couldn't fight or even comprehend, their zealotry finally gave way to primal fear. They scrambled, slipping and sliding in the mud, and fled back the way they came. Their retreat clumsy and panicked. As soon as they were gone, the mist dissipated, the trees straightened, and the ground solidified, leaving no trace of the encounter save for the lingering scent of ozone and fear. Naruto turned his attention back to the scene. The young stray devil was staring, his mouth agape, his terror now replaced with sheer, dumbfounded awe. Asia didn't hesitate. She rushed to his side. Kneeling in the dirt, "It's all right," she said, her voice soft and reassuring. "We're not going to hurt you." Her hands began to glow with the pure, gentle green of her sacred gear. And she placed them over the stray's wounded side. The raw, healing energy flowed into him, closing the wound and soothing his pain. The stray flinched at her touch, then relaxed, tears welling in his eyes as he felt not the searing pain of holy power, but a warmth that was pure and unconditionally kind. When the wound was fully closed, he looked from Asia's compassionate face to the tall, blonde man who had commanded the earth itself. He scrambled to his knees, bowing his head to the ground. Thank you, my lord. He stammered. Thank you. I will serve you for the rest of my life. I will be your slave. Just please, don't kill me. Naruto walked over and crouched down, meeting the stray at his eye level. He gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, making him look up. I am not your lord, Naruto said, his voice firm but kind. And I will not be your master. All I offer is a choice. He gestured back towards Akeno, Sharon, Gasper, and Asia. We have a home, a safe place, where you will not be hunted, and where no one will ask you to be anything other than yourself. You do not have to live in fear any longer. The choice to come with us is yours. The stray stared into Naruto's blue eyes, searching for the trick, the hidden price, the inevitable betrayal. He found nothing. There was only a calm, profound sincerity. He looked at the others, at the woman with the kind smile, the quiet girl with the cat-like eyes, the nervous boy hiding behind them. They were not a peerage, not a predator in his pack. They looked like a family. After years of running, of starving, of being hunted as vermin, the offer of a home, freely given, was a miracle more profound than turning mud into walls. Tears of gratitude and relief streamed down his face. Yes, he sobbed. Please, yes. From a high branch of a distant, untouched tree, Tsubaki Shinra, Sona Seatree's queen, lowered the magical binoculars she had been using. Her face was a mask of cold, professional shock. Shish. He had been on a routine patrol when she'd sensed the disturbance. She had recognized Akeno Himehime and Kaneko Tuju instantly. She had witnessed the entire event. The baffling, reality-bending display of power from the unknown man. The recruitment of a stray, and the clear defection of two of Rias Grimori's most powerful pieces. Her duty was clear. With a flick of her wrist, a magic communication circle flared to life in her hand. President, she said, her voice tight with urgency. You are not going to believe this. The report reached Rias Grimori less than 5 minutes later. She was in the Occult Research Club room, their old headquarters, now feeling cavernously empty, planning a reconnaissance mission with Kiba and Issei. Sona Seatree appeared via a large communication circle in the center of the room. Her expression unusually grim. Rias, Sona said without preamble. Tsubaki has eyes on them. They're in Kuo town, at the old church on the hill. Rias shot to her feet, her heart pounding. Are they alone? No, Sona replied, her voice grave. They are with the man you described. And, it appears they are gathering followers. Tsubaki just witnessed them save a stray devil from a group of exorcists and seemingly recruit him. The words struck Rias with the force of a physical blow. Gathering followers. The image that flashed in her mind was poisonous. Naruto, this false god. Building an army of strays and cast-offs, with her Akeno and her Kaneko as his lieutenants. It wasn't a rescue. It was a hostile takeover. He was setting up a rival kingdom in her territory, using her family. The betrayal, the grief, the humiliation of the past weeks coalesced into a single, focused point of pure, incandescent rage. He dares, she whispered, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a crimson aura. Small objects on the desks began to vibrate. Rias, be careful, Sona warned, sensing the immense spike in her power. Searsex's orders were to observe. He is in my town. With my people, turning them against me, Rias snarled, her eyes glowing with the untamed light of the power of destruction. Observation is over. She slammed her hand down on the table, and a crimson Grimori teleportation circle exploded into existence on the floor, its intricate runes burning with her fury. Kiba, Issei, with me, we are bringing them home. Back at the old church, Naruto had just helped the new, still weeping boy to his feet. Akeno was offering him a piece of food from a small bag she'd brought, a gesture of simple welcome. A sudden, violent surge of demonic energy ripped through the clearing, and the air was torn open by a vortex of crimson light. Rias Grimori stepped out of the magic circle, her crimson hair whipping around her as if caught in a hurricane of her own making. Issei, his boosted gear already summoned and glowing, and Kiba, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, appeared at her sides. She stood before Naruto and her former servants, her body trembling with the sheer force of her contained rage, her eyes locked on the faces of the girls she still considered her family. "So," she said, her voice dangerously, deceptively calm. "The traitors have finally decided to show their faces. And you," she spat, her venomous gaze finally landing on Naruto, "you will return what you have stolen from me." She raised a hand, a swirling ball of destructive energy already forming in her palm. "Give me back my servants." Naruto stepped forward, placing himself between Rias and the others. His own expression was, for the first time, not one of gentle compassion. It was one of firm, unyielding resolve, as solid and immovable as a mountain range. "They are not your property," he stated, his calm voice a stark contrast to her raging inferno. Yet it carried an authority that was just as absolute. "They made a choice. The only thing you have to do is respect it." Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Battle of Ideals. The air in the clearing crackled, heavy with the oppressive weight of Rias Grimori's fury. The Grimori crest burned on the ground, a crimson wound on the earth, and from it radiated a power that felt like the promise of total annihilation. It was a king's wrath, the indignation of a master whose property had been stolen, and it was a fearsome, terrible thing to behold. Issei's red gauntlet pulsed with power, the D-Drake's voice a low, mechanical growl in the sudden silence. Boost. Kiba's hand was a white-knuckled grip on the hilt of his demonic sword, his handsome face a mask of grim, loyal resolve. They were a united front, a king and her two remaining pieces, ready to reclaim what was theirs. The contrast with the group they faced was stark. The newly named Stray, Ren, scrambled behind Asia and Gasper, who stood their ground. Their fear eclipsed by a protective instinct they were only just discovering. Akeno and Sharon stepped forward, positioning themselves on either side of Naruto. They were not pieces moving at a king's command. They stood as individuals, their postures relaxed but ready, their power held in a calm, confident coil. "Your servants." Akeno's voice was the first to break the standoff. The old, teasing lilt was there, but it was underlined with a new, sharp edge of steel. Era, Rias, is that all we ever were to you? Possessions to be locked away in your collection. I gave you everything. Rias shot back, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and genuine hurt. I gave you a home when you had none. A name, a family, and you threw it all away for him. Her accusing finger stabbed the air, pointing at Naruto. You gave us a gilded cage. Sharon's voice was flat, cold, and utterly devoid of the forced stoicism she had once hidden behind. He offered us the sky. Issei took a step forward, his gauntlet raised. Don't listen to him, you guys. He's messing with your heads. Bushu loves you. I'm going to beat him up and knock some sense into you, and then we can all go home. His simple, earnest declaration was so completely out of tune with the reality of the situation that it was almost pitiable. He still saw a simple problem that could be solved by punching it. Naruto's gaze remained fixed on Rias. This is your last chance to walk away, he said, his voice calm and even, yet it carried the finality of a judge's sentence. This is not a battle you can win. I am Rias Grimori, she roared, the power of destruction swirling around her like a vortex. I do not run. Kiba, yes, my lady. With a burst of impossible speed, Kiba vanished, airing as a silver blur directly in front of Akeno, his demonic sword already descending in a deadly arc. Akeno-san, he said, his voice filled with regret, forgive me. But you are our queen. You must come back. You'll have to be much faster than that, Kiba-kun, Akeno replied, a sad smile on her lips. She didn't dodge, she simply raised a hand. From her right, an arc of pure, golden holy lightning erupted. From her left, a whip of dark, demonic energy materialized. The two opposing forces, which should have annihilated each other, instead twisted together, forming a spiraling spear of black K and gold that met Kiba's sword with a deafening shriek of power. Kiba was thrown back, his feet skidding in the dirt, his eyes wide with shock. Holy and demonic power, together. How? I stopped fighting myself, Akeno said. The spear of dual energies dancing in the air beside her. You are a knight who fights for his king. I am a queen who fights for herself. Let's see which is stronger. She moved, not with the calculated positioning of a chess piece, but with the fluid grace of a storm, her attacks a dazzling, unpredictable dance of light and shadow. Kiba, for all his legendary speed, found himself completely on the defensive. Forced to parry and dodge a barrage of attacks that came from two different, opposing sources at once. He was fighting one person, but it felt like he was fighting an army. At the same instant Kiba attacked, Issei charged, his feet pounding the earth. Boost, boost, boost. The amplified power surged through him. Kaneko-chan, snap out of it, he yelled, rowing a punch that carried the force of a battering ram. Sharon met his charge head-on. She did not brace herself with the immovable defense of a rook. She flowed around him. His punch, which could have leveled a small building, met only empty air as she sidestepped with a feline agility that seemed to defy inertia. She moved in close, inside his guard, and delivered a single, precise open palm strike to his chest. There was no explosive impact, no sound of shattering armor. But Issei gasped, the air driven from his lungs, as a pulse of pure, concentrated nature energy disrupted the flow of power in his boosted gear. The gauntlet sputtered, its red glow flickering. My power, he gasped, stumbling back. You rely on a power you borrow, Sharon stated, her voice dispassionate as she settled into a low fighting stance. Her twin tails swishing behind her. I am using my own. She was a blur of white, a whirlwind of kicks, palm strikes, and sharp, claw-like swipes. Issei, for all the raw power Deity granted him, couldn't land a single blow. He was a powerhouse, a siege engine. She was a master martial artist, a scalpel. She wasn't overpowering him. She was dismantling him, her every move precise, efficient, and aimed at the weaknesses in his stance, his technique, his very reliance on his sacred gear. He was being utterly, humiliatingly outclassed. While her former peerage demonstrated their newfound strength, Rias focused her entire being on the true architect of her pain. This ends now, she hissed, her hands gathering the swirling crimson and black energy of her lineage. The power of destruction was not mere magic, it was a conceptual force, the power to erase things from existence. She unleashed it, not as a single, focused beam, but as a barrage of dozens of small, fast-moving spheres. Each one a miniature bomb of annihilation. Disappear. The spheres screamed through the air, converging on Naruto from all angles. He stood perfectly still, making no move to defend himself. He simply raised his hand. As the spheres of destruction entered the space around him, they fizzled. They did not explode. They did not impact a barrier. They simply unraveled, their complex magical structure dissolving into harmless motes of red light, like sparks from a dying fire. The absolute power to erase was itself being erased, negated by a presence that was so fundamental. Why alive that it would not permit a void to be created in its vicinity? Rias stared in disbelief. She poured more power into her attack, creating larger, more potent blasts, but the result was the same. It was like trying to throw rocks into the sun. Her ultimate power, the pride of her house, the terror of her enemies, was completely and utterly useless. She watched in horror as Kiba was disarmed. His sword sent flying as Akino's light and shadow whip wrapped around his wrist, a controlled but absolute victory. She saw Issei, his armor flickering and failing, finally collapse to one knee as Shish. Iron landed a sharp kick to the side of his helmet, the blow precise enough to rattle him without causing serious injury. Her peerage, her remaining loyal pieces, had been defeated. A desperate, primal rage consumed her. All of her pride, her grief, and her fury coalesced into a single point of terrible power. She raised both her hands above her head, pouring every last drop of her demonic energy into one final, ultimate attack. The air grew cold, the light seemed to dim, and a massive sphere of swirling, chaotic energy, larger and more terrifying than anything she had ever created before, formed between her palms. It was a miniature black hole, a condensed star of pure, unadulterated destruction. If I cannot have them back, she screamed, her voice raw with anguish, then I will erase you. Extinguished star. She hurled the sphere forward. It tore through the air, consuming everything in its path, leaving a trail of absolute nothingness in its wake. It was the full, unrestrained power of a Grimoire, an attack that could threaten even a god. Naruto watched the approaching apocalypse, his expression turning from resolve to a deep, profound sorrow. He did not erect a shield. He did not counter with his own attack. He simply reached out and caught it. His palm met the roiling surface of the extinguished star. There was no cataclysmic explosion. The sphere of absolute destruction, large enough to wipe the entire hill from the map, simply stopped. It writhed and struggled in his grasp like a living thing, but it could not advance, and it could not dissipate. Rias's jaw fell open. Her mind refused to process what her eyes were seeing. Then, Naruto closed his hand. The extinguished star, the pinnacle of the power of destruction, was crushed. But it didn't explode. It imploded, collapsing in on itself until it was nothing more than a small, dense, black marble in his palm. He held it for a moment, then opened his fingers. The marble dissolved, not into nothingness, but into a cloud of gentle, warm, golden light particles that drifted up into the air and faded away, leaving the clearing feeling cleaner, purer, than it had before. He had not destroyed destruction. He had unmade it. He had taken her ultimate expression of nothingness and turned it back into something. The fighting stopped. Hiba stood in stunned silence. Issei, on his knees, could only stare. Akeno and Sharon looked on, not with triumph, but with a somber understanding of the gulf that separated their new protector from the rest of the world. Rias was empty. She had thrown everything she was, everything she had, at this man. And he had brushed it aside as if it were a child's tantrum. The fury that had sustained her was gone, leaving a hollow, aching void. Naruto took a step towards her, his movements slow, non-threatening. He stopped a few feet away, his blue eyes holding not the triumphant gaze of a victor, but the sad, compassionate look of a healer diagnosing a deep and terrible wound. "Your power is born of destruction," he said, his voice quiet, yet it echoed in the depths of her soul. "It is a power that can only unmake, only erase. You cannot create, you cannot heal, you cannot build. This power you cling to, this legacy you are so proud of, it is the cage you have built for yourself." The words struck her harder than any physical blow ever could. He hadn't just defeated her power, he had defined it, judged it, and found it wanting. He had held up a mirror to her soul and shown her not a king, but a prisoner. Tears, hot and shameful, welled in her eyes. It wasn't the tears of a princess in distress. It was the tears of a general whose entire strategy had been rendered obsolete, whose very reason for fighting had been exposed as a hollow lie. She had lost, not just the battle, she had lost the argument. She had lost her family. She had lost her certainty. She had lost. With a choked sob, she turned and slammed her hand on the ground, the Grimoire crest flaring to life one last time, weak and sputtering. "Retreat," she commanded, her voice thick with unshed tears. Hiba, his face a complex mask of awe and confusion, helped the dazed Issei to his feet. They stepped into the circle, their eyes still locked on their former comrades, who now seemed like strangers from a distant, unattainable world. Rias cast one last, broken look at Akeno and Sharon, then at the man who had taken everything from her by offering them something she never could. Then they were gone, leaving behind only the scent of scorched earth and shattered pride. The clearing was quiet once more. The battle was over, but there was no sense of celebration. Naruto walked over to the young stray, Ren, who was still hiding behind Asia, trembling. He knelt down, and the boy flinched. "It's over," Naruto said softly. "You are safe." Ren looked at the beings who had just stood against the legendary Rias Grimoire and won. He looked at the man who had caught a star in his hand. He was not looking at a new master. He was looking at a new beginning. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Whispers from the Gap. In the deepest, most secure levels of Grigori, the headquarters of the fallen angels, Azazel lounged in a chair that looked more like a dentist's torture device than a piece of furniture. He was surrounded by a chaotic halo of floating holographic screens, each one displaying a different stream of data. One showed the arcane energy fluctuations over Kuo town for the past month. Another displayed a complex breakdown of the Grimoire and Fennec's bloodline abilities. A third was simply playing a loop from an old giant robot anime. Azazel, the Governor-General of the Fallen Angels, a being of immense age and power, was happily munching on a bag of instant ramen, crunching the dry noodles like potato chips. "Fascinating," he muttered to himself, crumbs dusting his chin. He swiped a hand through the air, enlarging the report filed by Sona Citri's peerage. So, he stomps his foot, and the G round turns to mud and swallows 3 of our trained exorcists. No magic circle, no incantation, no detectable energy release. It just happened. Because he decided it should. Shemhazai, his second in command, stood nearby. His arms crossed, his expression one of deep concern. Azazel, this is not a toy. A being of unknown origin and unquantifiable power has appeared, dismantled the peerage of a devil king's sister, and is now operating freely in her territory. This is a political powder keg of the highest order. Of course it is. That's what makes it so interesting. Azazel said with a grin, tossing a dry noodle in the air and catching it in his mouth. For 1,000 years it's been the same old song and dance. Devils politicking, angels praying, and us fallen trying to find interesting ways to kill the boredom. Then this guy shows up. He doesn't fight, he ends fights. He doesn't use magic, he tells reality to do push-ups. He doesn't conquer, he adopts. He gestured to another skur, showing the profiles of Akeno and Kaneko. He's a complete and total paradigm shift. I haven't been this excited since I first started researching sacred gears. And what of Akeno Himahima? Shemhazai asked, his voice softening slightly. Barakiel is aware of the situation. He is concerned. Azazel's playful demeanor faded for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of something much older and more serious. Barakiel is always concerned, but the reports say his daughter is now wielding her holy lightning and her demonic power in tandem. That's not just a power-up, Shem. That's a miracle. It's a level of internal balance that no half-breed has ever achieved. This Naruto isn't just breaking the rules of the world, he's healing the people broken by them. He leaned back, a thoughtful, calculating glint in his eyes. Find out everything you can about him. His origins, his motives, his weaknesses. But do it quietly. I don't want to spook him. This isn't a specimen to be captured. This is a phenomenon to be studied. Shemhazai nodded. And what if the devils or the angels decide to act first? Azazel shrugged, the grin returning. Then we'll have some excellent data on his defensive capabilities. The information that sparked Azazel's academic curiosity lit a very different kind of fire in a different kind of being. In a desolate, forgotten corner of the world, within crumbling ruins of a fortress destroyed in the last Great War, Kokobile sat on a throne of rubble. He was a creature of sharp, cruel angles, his 10 black wings tattered but proud, his eyes burning with a fanatical, bored light. The fallen angels with him were not researchers or scholars, they were warriors, killers who longed for the glory days of open war. A new god. Kokobile chuckled, the sound like grinding stones as he read the report off a crackling magical projection. One who humbled Riser Phoenix with a touch and negated the power of destruction with a wave of his hand. He looked up at his followers, his smile widening into a predatory slash. It seems a new piece has been placed on the board. A very, very big piece. Shall we eliminate him, Lord Kokobile? One of his lieutenants asked, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He could be a threat to your plans. A threat, Kokobile laughed, a loud, booming sound that echoed through the ruins. You fool. He is not a threat. He is an opportunity. He stood up, pacing before his throne of debris, his movements filled with a manic energy. This world has grown stagnant. This peace is a disease. The devils hide in their underworld, counting their chess pieces. The angels in heaven polish their halos and weep over their dead god. Azazel and the others are content to sit in their labs and play with their toys. His voice rose to a fever pitch, filled with the righteous fury of a warrior left to rust in an age of diplomats. I miss the screaming, the rending of flesh, the glorious, beautiful chaos of the Great War. That was a time for heroes. A time for gods. This cold, quiet world has no place for a being like me. He stopped, turning to face his followers, his eyes alight with a mad inspiration. But this man, this Naruto, he is a catalyst. A force of nature dropped into a stagnant pond. The devils are already agitated. If I were to make a move in Kuo town, the territory of both Lucifer's and Leviathan's sisters, they would be forced to respond. And if this new god, who has already shown a protective instinct for the place, were to be drawn into the conflict. He spread his arms wide, a messian. I see figure wreathed in shadow and ambition. Imagine it. A three-way battle. The devils, a renegade fallen angel Kadri, and a self-proclaimed god. The resulting conflict would be enough to shatter this pathetic truce. It would force Azazel's hand. It would force heaven to respond. It would be the spark that ignites the world and begins a glorious, new great war. His followers cheered, their bloodlust stirred by his vision. Kokabeel smiled, a true and terrible sight. He had his plan. He would steal the Excalibur fragments from the church, a direct provocation to heaven. He would take the battle to Kuo Academy, a direct challenge to the devils. And he would create a stage of chaos so grand, so irresistible, that this new god would have no choice but to make an appearance. The world would burn again, and it would be beautiful. The return to the sanctuary after the battle was a somber affair. There was no joy in their victory. Akeno and Sharon were quiet, the memory of fighting their foe. RMER friends leaving a bitter taste in their mouths. Ren, the stray they had rescued, was overwhelmed, trying to process the shift from a life of terrified survival to being a part of a family that challenged the rulers of the underworld. Naruto led them to the center of the clearing, his own face unusually grave. The brief conflict had left ripples, not just in the political landscape of the devils, but in the very fabric of the cosmos. He could feel it, a faint, discordant hum at the edge of his senses. The change, when it came, was not subtle like before. It was a violent, tearing wound. The lavender sky of the sanctuary darkened as if a storm were gathering. The gentle, life-giving energy of the place grew thin and cold. The glowing flowers wilted, their light guttering out like dying candles. The crystal stream ran sluggish and murky. With a sound like tearing reality, a massive, gaping fissure ripped open at the edge of the forest. It was not a small hole. It was a wound in the world. A bleeding portal of absolute blackness from which a palpable aura of malice and void radiated, actively poisoning the sanctuary's atmosphere. Get back, all of you, to the house. Now, Naruto commanded. The gentle caretaker was gone, replaced in an instant by a warrior of immense antiquity. His voice was not loud, but it held a tone of absolute command that left no room for argument. They scrambled back, their hearts pounding with a primal fear. From the black fissure, a figure emerged. It was not the mindless, insectoid creature from before. This being was vaguely humanoid, tall and slender, forged from what looked like solidified shadow and shards of broken starlight. It had no face, only a smooth, polished surface that reflected their own terror back at them. 4 long, spindly arms grew from its back, each one ending in a wicked, shimmering blade that seemed to be forged from pure nothingness. This was not just a beast. This was a herald. Its presence was an active blight. The grass at its feet turned gray, brittle, and died. It turned its featureless face towards Naruto, and though it had no eyes, they all felt the weight of its cold, intelligent gaze. Naruto stepped forward, his body now humming with a power they had never seen before. A vibrant, golden-orange aura enveloped him, so bright it pushed back against the encroaching darkness. The very air around him immersed with the density of the nature energy he was drawing into himself. "You are far from your master's cage, little shadow," Naruto said, his voice low and dangerous. The Abyss Herald did not reply with words. It lunged, moving with a speed that made Kiba's look like a slow crawl. It crossed the 100 yards between them in an instant, its 4 void blades slashing through the air, leaving thin, black trails where reality itself had been temporarily severed. Naruto didn't dodge, he met the attack head-on. Constructs of pure, golden life energy erupted from the ground around him, massive, spiraling roots from the silver-barked trees that moved like striking serpents, lances of solidified light that formed in his hands. The clash was silent but cataclysmic. The herald's blades of nothingness met Naruto's lances of creation. And for a moment, the two opposing forces held each other in a perfect, terrible equilibrium. The girls watched in stunned awe from the doorway of the house. This was not the effortless, conceptual victory he had won against Riser Arias. This was a fight. The herald was impossibly fast, its movements alien and unpredictable. It wielded the void as a weapon, its blades phasing in and out of existence, striking from impossible angles. Naruto was its equal. His movements were a blur of gold and white, a dance of absolute mastery. He didn't just command the nature energy of the sanctuary. He was the sanctuary. The ground rose to block attacks, the air itself solidified to parry a blade of void. It was a battle between a being of pure, generative life and a being of pure, consumptive emptiness. The herald, realizing it could not win with speed, floated back and raised all four of its arms. The blades merged, forming a swirling vortex of absolute blackness. A miniature version of the extinguished star, but fouler, more malignant. It hurled the void at Naruto. Naruto's face was a mask of grim concentration. He brought his hands together, and the golden aura around him intensified. Swirling violently, a high-pitched, blade-like sound filled the air as he compressed an immense amount of nature energy into a single point. He formed a spinning, star-shaped disk of pure, golden power. Its edges so sharp they seemed to cut the light itself. He met the sphere of void with his golden star. When the two attacks met, there was no explosion of sound or light. There was only a deafening silence as the two fundamental forces of creation and annihilation battled for dominance. For a terrifying second, the black void began to consume the golden star. Then, with a final, guttural yell of effort, Naruto poured more of himself into the attack. The golden star flared, overwhelmed the void, and struck the Abyss Herald in the center of its torso. The herald didn't scream, it simply dissolved, its form breaking apart as the pure, generative life energy unmade its very structure. It detonated in a silent, violent flash of golden light that washed over the entire clearing, revitalizing everything it touched. The grass turned a vibrant green once more, the flowers bloomed with renewed brilliance, and the stream ran crystal clear. Naruto stood in the center of the clearing, breathing slightly heavier than usual, his golden aura slowly receding. He looked at the spot where the fissure had been, now just a faint, shimmering scar in the air. The look on his face was one of grim certainty. He turned to the girls, who were staring at him, their faces pale with a mixture of terror and awe. "I believe," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of the explanation he was about to give. "It is time I told you the truth about the war you were really fighting." He sat with them by the now placid stream, the grim evidence of the battle already healed by his power. "This world you know, with its heavens and underworlds, its pantheons and factions, it is a bright, noisy island of life in the middle of a vast, dark, silent ocean." He gestured to the sky. "The space between spaces, what some of you call the dimensional gap, is not empty. It is a prison, and inside that prison sleeps something very old, a primordial entity from the dawn of creation. A god, if you wish to use that term, but not like any you know. It is a being of absolute entropy, of perfect subjugation. It feeds on conflict, on hatred, fear, despair, and most of all, on the energy generated by systems of servitude." Their eyes widened, the implication hitting them like a physical blow. "The devil's evil peace system. The great war between your three factions was a feast for it," Naruto continued, his voice grim. "A banquet of death and hatred so grand that it nearly gave the entity the strength to break its chains. Since then, your peace has been nothing more than a slow, steady drip of sustenance, keeping it strong. My arrival here, a sudden, massive surge of pure, creative life energy, was like a thunderclap in its silent darkness. It woke the prison's vermin." He looked towards the scar in the air. "The creatures you have seen, the Abyss Heralds, they are extensions of its will. Probes, sent to investigate the disturbance. The first was a mindless scout. The one we just fought, that was a soldier. It means the prisoner is not just stirring. It is becoming aware." He looked at each of them, his blue eyes impressing upon them the terrible gravity of his words. "Your squabbles with Rias Grimori, the political games of the underworld, the tensions between the factions, it is all a child's argument in the shadow of a tidal wave. This world's obsession with conflict, its addiction to war and control, is ringing a dinner bell for a horror that will consume you all, devil, angel, and fallen alike." The sanctuary was quiet, the weight of their personal dramas, of betrayal, of finding a home, of overcoming their pasts, suddenly seemed so small, so insignificant. Their beautiful, perfect haven wasn't a refuge from the world. It was the front line of a war against the end of it. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Price of Arrogance. The night over Kuo Academy was unnaturally still. The usual symphony of crickets and distant city traffic was absent, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. A vast, Intricate magic circle, pulsing with a malevolent purple light, had unfurled across the entire sky, casting the school grounds in a sickly, apocalyptic glow. It was a declaration of war, painted across the heavens for all in the supernatural world to see. At the center of the school's athletic field, Rias Gramori stood back to back with Sona Citri. Their peerages were assembled, forming a defensive perimeter. The air was thick with a power so immense and ancient it felt like the sky was pressing down on them. "This is the energy of a Cadre-class fallen angel," Sona said. Her voice tight as she adjusted her glasses, her analytical mind struggling to process the sheer scale of the magical working above them. "And it's not Azazel's. This is raw, untamed, and ecstatic. He's daring us," Rias growled, her own power simmering just beneath her skin. The sting of her defeat at Naruto's hands was still fresh, but this was different. This was a direct, unambiguous attack on her territory. "He's making a show of this. He wants a war." As if summoned by her words, a figure descended from the center of the magic circle, landing on the field with a soft crunch of grass. He had 10 tattered black wings, a cruel, handsome face, and eyes that burned with the cold, fanatical light of a zealot. He was flanked by a monstrous, 3-headed hound the size of a truck. Its 6 red eyes glowing with feral hunger, and a small retinue of robed fallen angels, their faces grim and their weapons drawn. "Rias Gramori," Sona Citri, Kokabeel said, his voice a theater. Ical baritone that boomed across the field. "The little sisters of the pretend Lucifer and the pretend Leviathan. It is an honor to be the instrument of your demise." "Kokabeel," Sona stated, her voice cold. "What is the meaning of this? An unprovoked attack on a neutral territory is a direct violation of the treaty." Kokabeel threw his head back and laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Treaty, peace. These are the words of cowards and old men who have forgotten the taste of blood. I have come to Kuo Town to give this rotting world a gift. The gift of glorious, beautiful war." He spread his arms wide, a mad conductor orchestrating his symphony of destruction. "I have already procured the Excalibur fragments from the church. A delightful little provocation for Michael and his flock. Now, by killing the 2 of you here, on this pathetic patch of dirt, I will force your brothers to act. The fragile peace will shatter, the old hatreds will reignite, and we can once again have a proper war. A war of gods and devils, where a true warrior can find his purpose." "You're insane," Issei yelled, stepping forward, his boosted gear flaring to life. "Boost, am I?" Kokabeel sneered. "Or am I the only one who remembers what true power feels like?" His gaze swept the field, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "But this is hardly a worthy opening act. I was hoping for a more divine performance. I've heard rumors of a new god in town, one who performs little miracles. I was hoping he'd accept my invitation to the stage." He sighed dramatically. "No matter. We'll start with the opening act. Let's see if you can survive the hounds of hell." With a snap of his fingers, Cerberus let out a tripartite roar that shook the very foundations of the school. At the same time, the ground began to boil, and from dozens of smaller magic circles, monstrous, summoned creatures began to claw their way to the surface, gargoyles, imps, and hulking demonic beasts. "Engage," Sona commanded, her peerage moving with practiced, tactical precision. Water magic, defensive shields, and coordinated strikes erupted as they met the first wave. Rias and her peerage charged. Heba was a silver flash, his demonic swords cutting down beasts with every strike. Issei was a crimson battering ram, his amplified punches turning monsters to dust. Rias herself unleashed controlled blasts of destruction, clearing swaths of enemies at a time. But it wasn't enough. For every monster they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. Kokabeel watched from the center of the chaos, a bored, amused smirk on his face. Making no move to join the fight himself. Cerberus was a whirlwind of teeth and claws, its 3 heads acting in perfect, deadly concert, forcing Sona's entire peerage to focus their efforts just to keep it contained. The devils were fighting bravely, competently, but they were being overwhelmed. The sheer number of summoned beasts was endless, a tide of claws and teeth designed to wear them down. Saji, Sona's pawn, was thrown through the air by a swipe from Cerberus, saved only by a last-second shield from Tsubaki. Issei's armor was already showing signs of strain, the const. And need to boost his power draining him faster than he could recover. Is this all Asaden's sister has to offer? Kokobeel taunted, his voice easily cutting through the din of battle. How pathetic. He finally moved. He vanished from his spot and reappeared directly in front of Rias, his speed so immense that even she barely had time to react. He formed a spear of pure, condensed holy light in his hand and thrust it forward. Kiba intercepted, his body a blur as he materialized between them, his sword meeting the light spear with a deafening clang. The force of the impact sent Kiba flying backward, his sword arm numb and smoking. A loyal knight, Kokobeel mused, I'll grant you that. He flicked his wrist, and a dozen more light spears formed in the air around him, all aimed at the downed Kiba and the stunned Rias. But loyalty is just a pretty word for a chain. Allow me to free you from it. He was about to unleash the volley, an attack that Rias knew she could not fully block, an attack that would kill her knight and mortally wound her. In that moment of absolute despair, as she stared at her impending death, a gentle, golden light enveloped the entire athletic field. It was not a violent explosion of power. It was a calm, serene wave, like the first rays of sunrise. The summoned monsters, creatures born of demonic and chaotic energies, shrieked as the light washed over them. The weaker ones dissolved instantly into black dust. The stronger ones staggered, their power significantly diminished, their aggression turning to fear. Cerberus whined, its three heads looking around in confusion. Its feral rage momentarily quelled. Kokobeel's light spears wavered and then dissipated, their holy energy neutralized by a force that was purer, older, and fundamentally superior. Naruto and his followers stood at the edge of the field. They had not arrived in a teleportation circle. They had simply walked out of the shadows, their presence instantly and completely altering the balance of the entire battlefield. Kokobeel's eyes widened, and then his bored smirk transformed into a wide, ecstatic grin. There you are, he boomed, his voice filled with genuine, joyous excitement. The main event has finally arrived. I was beginning to think you were a coward. Naruto ignored him. His calm, blue eyes swept over the scene, the exhausted devils, the wounded students, the terrified Saji being tended to by Sona's bishop, the raw destruction. His gaze finally settled on Rias, who was staring at him with a complex mixture of shock, resentment, and unwilling relief. He then turned to the four who stood with him. Akeno, Sharon, Asia, and Gasper. Ren, the new stray, was with them, his eyes wide with terror, but he was standing his ground. Naruto gave them a single, simple instruction. His voice calm but resonating with an authority that dwarfed Kokobeel's theatrical booming. Protect the innocent. I will handle him. It was not a request. It was a statement of purpose. It was their new creed. And then they moved. It was not the rigid, formation-based movement of a peerage. It was the fluid, intuitive synergy of a true team. Akeno took to the sky, her single pair of black fallen angel wings now joined by a shimmering aura of golden light, giving her the appearance of a creature of both dusk and dawn. She raised her hands, and a storm of her own making descended upon the remaining monsters. Spiraling bolts of intertwined holy lightning and demonic shadow rained down from above, not with the wild rage she had once possessed, but with a terrifying, beautiful precision, each bolt finding its mark, annihilating the beasts without so much as scorching the grass where the students were huddled. On the ground, Sharon became a phantom. She moved with a silent, liquid grace, a white blur darting through the chaos. Her senjutsu, amplified by the natural energy of the world around her, allowed her to perceive every threat, every monster's weakness. She didn't waste a single motion. A palm strike to a pressure point would cause a hulking beast to implode. A swift kick, enhanced with nature energy, would shatter a gargoyle's stone hide. She was not a rook, tanking damage. She was a blade, ending threats before they could even fully form. Asia ran directly towards the wounded Sona Citri peerage, her face set with a determination that was a world away from the timid girl she had been. Ren followed her, armed with a small dagger of demonic energy, his fear still visible but his resolve to protect his new family overriding it. Get back, one of Sona's rooks yelled, trying to shield them. It's too dangerous. Asia didn't stop. She knelt beside the wounded Saji, her hands glowing with a green light so pure and potent it made the devils stare in awe. It's okay, she said. We're here to help. She created a dome of pure, healing energy, a sanctuary in the middle of the battlefield that protected the wounded and began to knit their injuries back together. Gasper, however, was frozen. His old fear threatening to swallow him whole. A group of gargoyles, having survived Akino's initial barrage, broke off and charged towards Asia's position, their eyes set on the vulnerable healer. Ren tried to stand in their way, but he was swatted aside like a fly. Asia-san, Gasper shrieked, seeing his kindest friend about to be torn apart. In that moment, H's terror for himself was eclipsed by his terror for her. His eyes, normally hidden behind his bangs, flashed a brilliant, crimson red. He threw his hands forward, and the world went gray. It wasn't the small, localized field of time-stopping he had used before. Fueled by a desperate, protective instinct, he unleashed the full, unrestrained power of his forbidden Belur view. A massive wave of temporal energy washed over the battlefield. And every single monster, including the mighty Cerberus, was frozen in place, their snarling faces locked into statues of gray stone. The devils stared in utter shock. They had never seen the Grimoire bishop wield his sacred gear with such power or on such a scale. In the span of a few heartbeats, the tide of the battle had been completely and utterly turned. The endless horde was neutralized. The wounded were being healed. The chaos was brought to a standstill. Akino, Sharon, Asia, and Gasper had done what the combined peerages of two Satan's sisters could not. They hadn't just fought better. They had fought smarter, with a synergy and a purpose that was born of freedom, not obligation. Kokobile watched the utter decimation of his fodder army, and he laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated delight. Yes, yes, magnificent, he roared, completely ignoring the frozen Cerberus. He dismissed his rogue fallen angel followers with a wave of his hand, sending them back through the magic circle. I have no more need for pathetic distractions. He turned his full, undivided attention to Naruto, who hadn't moved a single step. The field was now clear. The two of them stood alone in the center of a sea of frozen monsters and stunned devils. You, Kokobile said, his eyes burning with a warrior's joy. You are the one I have been waiting for. You are a true opponent. Your followers have proven their worth. Now, show me yours. He spread his 10 wings wide, and the oppressive power that had filled the sky now focused entirely on him. Lances of light, swords of shadow, the very power of a war god of old, all began to gather around him. Let us give this pathetic, peaceful world a night to remember. He bellowed. Let us show them the beauty of true destruction. Naruto's calm, blue eyes met the fallen angel's ecstatic, burning gaze. His own golden aura began to rise once more, a quiet, unshakable sun rising to meet a raging, chaotic storm. The stage was set. The audience was in place. The battle for the soul of the night was about to begin. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. A God's Judgment. The world, held in the gray stasis of Gasper's power, seemed to hold its breath. The athletic field had become a grotesque sculpture garden of frozen monsters. In the center of this silent chaos, two beings remained untouched, two poles of opposing reality. Kokobile's ecstatic grin did not falter. He looked upon the frozen tableau not as a defeat, but as a fittingly dramatic clearing of the stage. A time-stopping sacred gear of that magnitude, he mused aloud, his voice echoing in the stillness. Impressive. You gather interesting followers, God. He cracked his neck, a sound that was unnaturally loud in the silence. But the children's games are over. With a surge of his own immense power, he shattered the temporal field around him. The gray world did not return to color, but the space immediately surrounding Kokobile was once again alive and brimming with malicious energy. He spread his 10 wings, each one a blade of shadow cutting through the frozen time. Now, he said, his voice dropping to a low, hungry growl. Let me show you the power that made the armies of heaven and hell tremble. He raised a hand, and the very air above him tore open. From the rift, a storm of holy javelins, each one humming with the power to vaporize a high-class devil, descended upon Naruto. Simultaneously, he forged a massive broadsword in his other hand, a blade of pure, solidified darkness that seemed to drink the purple light of the magic circle above. He unleashed his barrage and charged, a god of war in his element. Naruto's golden aura pulsed once, a soft, warm beat. He made no move to dodge or summon a weapon. He simply stood, a cal. Am I in the center of a hurricane of divine and infernal power? The holy javelins, weapons that could sunder mountains, struck the golden aura and dissolved. They did not explode. They simply ceased to be. Their holy energy reclaimed by the world as if it were a dead being called in. Kokobeel's sword of shadow, a weapon forged to kill gods, swung down in a decapitating arc. It met an invisible, unyielding barrier a foot from Naruto's neck, the impact creating a silent shockwave that cracked the ground for 50 yards in every direction. "Is that all?" Naruto asked, his voice quiet, yet it cut through Kokobeel's raging power like a diamond through glass. The sheer, effortless ease of the defense staggered the onlookers more than any flashy counterattack could have. Rias, Sona, and their peerages, now free from the time stop as its focus was broken, could only stare. What is that?" Issei stammered, his gauntlet silent. Inside his head, Dedrag's ancient, draconic voice was, for the first time, laced with something that sounded like genuine awe. "That is not a barrier of magic, partner. That is the world itself. He is using the planet's own life force, senjutsu of a purity and density I have never felt, as a shield. Attacking him is like trying to punch the ocean." Kokobeel was not deterred. He was delighted. Yes, this is it. A true challenge. He backed away, laughing, and unleashed a torrent of attacks. Beams of light, waves of darkness, elemental magic that scorched the earth and froze the air. It was a dazzling, terrifying display of the power that had made him a legend. And none of it touched Naruto. He stood utterly still, his golden aura a perfect, inviolable sphere. He was not just defending himself. His aura had expanded, a silent, golden dome that now covered the entire school building, shielding the frozen monsters and the watching devils from the cataclysmic splash damage of Kokobeel's onslaught. He was protecting everyone and everything on the field, friend and foe alike. Rias watched, her mind reeling. She wielded the power of destruction. She had been taught that ultimate power was the ability to erase, to annihilate. But here was a being whose ultimate power was the ability to preserve, to stand against an apocalypse and simply endure, protecting all that was behind him. It was a philosophy of strength so alien to her that it fundamentally shook her understanding of the world. "Why don't you fight back?" Kokobeel roared, his attacks growing more frantic, more desperate. "Are you a coward? Is this all you can do? Hide inside your shell." "I am not hiding," Naruto replied, his voice calm and clear over the din. "I am waiting for you to realize the futility of your actions." Futility. War is the ultimate meaning. The clash of wills. The forging of strength in the crucible of combat. It is the greatest expression of life. "You mistake noise for meaning," Naruto said, and for the first time, he moved. He took a single, slow step forward. "You do not forge strength. You only break things. You do not express life. You celebrate death. Your war is nothing but a child's tantrum on a cosmic scale, a desperate scream for a tension from a world that has outgrown you." Each word was a precise, cutting blow to Kokobeel's soul. The fallen angel's ecstatic grin faltered, replaced by a snarl of pure rage. "You dare." "I am done waiting," Naruto said. He raised a hand. The battle ended. He did not launch an attack. He simply took control. He reached out with his will and grasped the very essence of Kokobeel's power. Kokobeel's 10 black wings, the symbol of his pride and his power as a fallen angel, suddenly froze. He tried to move them, to flap them, but they were no longer his to command. "What is this?" he snarled, a flicker of true fear finally entering his eyes. "Your power is borrowed," Naruto stated, his voice devoid of malice, holding only the cold finality of a universal law. "It is the light that was given to you at your creation. A light you have since corrupted with your hatred and your bloodlust. I am simply returning it to its original state." With a soft, chiming sound, Kokobeel's wings began to dissolve. They did not burn or tear. They unraveled, the black, corrupted feathers turning into motes of pure, white gold light, the holy energy that was their source. In seconds, the 10 proud wings that had carried him through the Great War were gone, transformed into a swirling, beautiful nebula of pure, sanctified light that hung in the air around him. Kokobeel stared at his back, then at Naruto, his face a mask of utter, uncomprehending horror. He had been stripped of his heritage, his power, his very identity as a fallen angel, without a single blow being struck. But Naruto was not finished. He gestured with his free hand, and the massive cloud of holy light he had just reclaimed began to move. It descended upon the battlefield like a gentle rain. Where it touched the frozen forms of the summoned monsters, they did not just thaw. They were purified, their demonic forms dissolving peacefully into the earth. Where it touched the scorched and cracked ground, the grass grew back, lush and green. The damage from the battle, the very scars Kokobel had tried to inflict upon the world, were being healed, erased by the very power he had just tried to use for destruction. It was the ultimate, most profound insult. His very essence had been taken and used to undo his life's work. Powerless, wingless, and spiritually broken, Kokobel fell to his knees. The mad warrior was gone, leaving only a hollow, trembling shell. What are you?" he whispered. "I am Balance," Naruto replied. He walked forward until he stood over the kneeling fallen angel. "You crave the glory of the end. So you are blind to the beauty of the beginning. You worship the final, dying scream, so you are deaf to the first, quiet breath. You have lived your long life only to seek its end. That is your final failure." He placed a hand on Kokobel's head. "I will not grant you the warrior's death you so desperately crave. A being who only seeks to end life does not deserve to partake in it." A brilliant, green light, the color of the first spring leaf, erupted from Naruto's palm. It was not a destructive energy. It was a life force so potent, so overwhelmingly generative, that it was a prison in itself. From the ground beneath Kokobel, the roots of a tree began to grow. They were not normal roots, but roots of pure, solidified life energy. They wrapped around his legs, his torso, his arms, pulling him down. The wood grew upward, forming a trunk that encased his body, smooth and seamless. Branches sprouted, and on them, silver leaves unfurled and white, glowing flowers bloomed. In less than a minute, where the great war criminal Kokobel had knelt, there stood a magnificent, beautiful tree, its white flowers giving off an aura of profound, timeless peace. He was not dead. He was trapped, suspended in a state of eternal, dreamless slumber, his life force fueling the very tree that was his prison, his own existence repurposed to be a silent, beautiful monument to life instead of death. The battlefield was silent. The purple magic circle in the sky, its master now gone, shattered like glass and faded away, allowing the gentle light of the moon to return. From a high-up perch on the school roof, hidden in shadows, a young man with silver hair and a lazy smile lowered a pair of binoculars. He wore the Kuo Academy uniform, but his presence felt entirely alien to it. "Well now, Albion," he said to the air. A powerful, draconic voice, ancient rival to DxD, echoed in his mind. His power is absurd. He did not defeat Kokobel. He rewrote him. He treated a cadre class being Lee K a misbehaving line of code and simply deleted his functions. Indeed, the young man, Valley Lucifer, mused, a predatory glint in his eyes. Rias Grimori's rival is far more interesting than I could have possibly imagined. He stood up, stretching like a cat. "It seems my destined battle with Issei Hyodo might have to wait. A new, much more enticing dragon has just appeared on the board." With a flash of white light, 12 massive, draconic wings of light erupted from his back, and he vanished into the night sky. His interest peaked, a new and far more dangerous threat now aware of Naruto's existence. Down on the field, the devils were slowly beginning to process the sheer, paradigm-shattering reality of what they had just witnessed. They looked from the beautiful, impossible tree to the calm, golden-haired man who stood before it. He was not a king who commanded. He was not a warrior who destroyed. He was something else entirely. A fundamental force of nature, a judge, and a protector. And in that moment, Rias Grimori finally understood. She had not lost her servants to a rival master. They had left a queen to follow a true deity. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. A New Pantheon. The silence that followed the transformation was more profound than the temporal stasis that had preceded it. The malevolent purple glow in the sky was gone, replaced by the soft, indifferent light of the moon. The battlefield, once a scene of chaotic violence, was now eerily peaceful. The grass was green and whole. The air was clean, and at the center of it all stood a single, magnificent white-flowered tree. An impossible monument to a victory that had been won without hatred. Rias and Sona's peerages stood frozen, their minds struggling to bridge the gap between what they knew to be possible and what they had just witnessed. They had prepared for a bloody, desperate battle against a legendary war criminal. They had not prepared for a philosophical debate that ended with a forced, non-lethal apotheosis into a piece of decorative flora. It was Azazel who broke the spell. He appeared not with a grand display of power, but by casually strolling out of the shadows of the school building, a half-eaten bag of chips in his hand. He was followed by a grim-faced Shemhazai. "Well now," Azazel said, his voice deceptively casual as he crunched on a chip, his eyes sparkling with an academic's delight as he examined the cocobeal tree. "I have to say, that's a new one. Turning a war-crazed maniac into a very aesthetically pleasing piece of topiary. Do you do commissions? I have a list of people who could desperately use some repurposing." His flippant tone was a jarring but necessary shock, pulling everyone back to reality. Before anyone could respond to his absurd question, two more TS of arrivals made their presence known. A massive, crimson magic circle, infinitely more complex and powerful than the one Rias had used, bloomed on the field. From it stepped Searsex, Lucifer and Graphia. Searsex's gentle smile was gone, replaced by an expression of profound, weighty seriousness as his gaze took in the tree, Naruto, and his sister's stunned face. Simultaneously, a column of pure, golden-white light descended from the heavens. It was not the searing, judgmental light of the exorcists, but a light that felt of grace, compassion, and ancient sorrow. From it emerged a man with 12 golden wings and a face of serene, angelic beauty. Michael, the leader of the angels, had arrived. He was accompanied by a handful of his seraphim and a surprised-looking Irina Shido, who gasped when she saw her friend Asia standing safe and whole. The leaders of the three great factions now stood on the same field, their attention focused not on each other, but on the single, calm man at its center. The Cold War that had defined their existence for a millennium had been rendered momentarily irrelevant. Searsex was the first of the leaders to speak, his voice carrying the calm authority of a true king. "Your power is beyond our classifications," he said, his eyes fixed on Naruto. "You have dealt with a threat that would have cost us all dearly. For that, you have my gratitude. But I must ask, what is your intention toward the Devil faction? Toward this world?" It was the question that mattered, the one that would determine if this night ended in a truce or in a new, even more terrifying war. "My intentions are unchanged," Naruto replied, his voice calm, addressing all three leaders equally. "I am not here to conquer, to rule, or to disrupt your balance of power. I am here to offer a choice. A sanctuary for those who wish to be free from the cages you have built." "A fine sentiment," Michael said, his voice like the chime of 1,000 tiny bells. "And your actions tonight speak of a power that is overwhelmingly aligned with life and preservation. But you must understand the instability you have introduced." "The instability was already here," Naruto countered, his gaze sweeping over them all. "You have simply been ignoring it." He looked up at the moonlit sky. "This world you know, this constant struggle for dominance between your factions, it is a child's game played in the shadow of a volcano. Your conflict is feeding a sickness that, when it fully awakens, will consume everything you hold dear." He then told them. He spoke of the primordial entity sleeping in the dimensional gap. He described the Abyss Heralds, the probes sent by a slumbering, hungry god. He explained that their great war had nearly broken its prison, and that their current, simmering animosity was a constant, slow drip of nourishment, a ringing dinner bell in a silent, empty house. The faces of the faction leaders, beings who had seen and commanded unimaginable power, grew pale. They knew of the horrors of the dimensional gap, of the creatures like the dragon of dragons, Ophis. But what Naruto described was something else. Not a rival for power, but a conceptual end to all things. "This entity," Searsex said, his voice tight. "You are certain of this?" "I have fought its heralds," Naruto stated simply. "Their nature is anathema to this world. They are the antithesis of life itself. When it wakes, it will not care if you are devil, angel, or fallen. It will only see a meal." Azazel, for once, was not smiling. He rubbed his chin, his mind racing through millennia of forgotten lore and forbidden texts. "It makes a terrifying kind of sense," he murmured. "The energy spikes during the war, the rise of extremist groups like the Chaos Brigade, it could all be a symptom of this sickness." While the leaders processed this apocalyptic revelation, Rias finally moved. She walked not towards her brother, but towards her former peerage, her steps heavy. She stopped before Akeno, her eyes searching her old friend's face. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, painful confusion. "Why?" Rias asked, her voice barely a whisper. It was not the demand of a king, but the genuine, heartbroken question of a friend. "Was the life I gave you so terrible?" Akeno met her gaze, and her own eyes softened with a sad, empathetic understanding. "The life you gave us was a shelter from the storm, Rias," she said, her voice gentle, "and we will always be grateful for that. You saved us." She paused, gesturing with her head towards Naruto, who was now in a low, intense conversation with the three faction leaders. "But he didn't offer us shelter. He offered us a cure for the storm inside ourselves." She held up her hands, and a small, perfectly balanced orb of intertwined light and shadow formed between them. "You gave me a place to hide from what I was. He taught me how to embrace all of it. You offered us a place in your family, and we love you for it. But he offered us a chance to be whole." The simple, profound truth of her words settled over Rias, a final, painful piece of understanding clicking into place. She had seen them as broken things that she had rescued and given value. He had seen them as whole beings who had simply forgotten their own worth. It was a fundamental difference that she was only now beginning to comprehend. She had no response. She could only nod, a silent acknowledgement of her own blindness. At the center of the field, a decision had been reached. "We will need time to verify this threat," Searsex announced, his voice regaining its kingly composure. "But we would be fools to ignore such a warning from a being of your stature. A truce, for now, is not just wise, it is necessary. The three factions will cease all open hostilities against one another and will begin a joint investigation into this entity." Michael nodded his assent. "Heaven agrees. We will share our knowledge. The time for old hatreds is past." Azazel shrugged, a hint of his old grin returning. "Well, I'm all for not getting eaten by a cosmic horror from beyond time and space. Grigori will cooperate. Besides, this is the most interesting thing to happen in eons." Naruto inclined his head. "My sanctuary remains as it is. A neutral ground. A refuge for any who seek it. I will not interfere in your affairs, so long as you do not try to reclaim those who have chosen a different path." His eyes flickered towards Rias, a silent, final statement. With the new, fragile world order established, the leaders prepared to depart. Michael offered a final, respectful bow to Naruto before ascending in his column of light. Searsex gave his sister a long, complicated look before he and Graphia vanished in a flash of crimson. Azazel lingered for a moment, looking from Naruto to the tree. "You know," he said, "if you ever get tired of the quiet, contemplative life, Grigori is always looking for researchers with a unique perspective on applied metaphysics." He winked, then vanished into the shadows, leaving the field empty save for the two groups who had started the night as enemies. There was a long, awkward silence. The chasm between them was still there, but the anger and hostility that had defined it were gone. "Akeno, Kaneko," Rias began, her voice hesitant. "Be safe." Akeno offered a small, genuine smile. "You too, Rias." Sharon gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reunion, but it was a beginning. Acknowledgement. Respect. Naruto turned to his followers. "It is time to go home." He looked at them, not as a master inspecting his troops, but as a proud parent looking at his children. Akeno, a perfect synthesis of light and shadow, her inner war finally over. Sharon, her Nekomata features displayed without shame, a master of nature's power. Asia, her hands still glowing with the residual energy of her healing, a beacon of pure, unconditional life. Gasper, standing outside his box, his eyes no longer filled with terror but with a newfound confidence in the incredible power he wielded. And Ren, the stray, looking at them all with an expression of pure, unadulterated hope, the first of man. Who would find their way to this new path? They gathered around him, not behind him in a subservient formation, but beside him, as equals. They were not a peerage, bound by the magic of a chess piece. They were not a faction, united by blood or ideology. They were a family, forged in choice and healed by acceptance. They were a new pantheon, not of gods to be worshipped, but of ideals to be striven for, balance. Nature, life, courage, hope, and at its center, freedom. A gentle, golden light enveloped them. Rias watched as they faded, not with the sharp, tearing energy of a teleportation circle, but like a dream at dawn. They left behind a healed battlefield, a silent, beautiful tree, and a world that had been irrevocably, fundamentally changed. Rias Gramori stood with her remaining family, looking at the empty space where her old one had been, contemplating a future that was suddenly far larger, more terrifying, and filled with more wonder than she had ever imagined. The age of masters and servants was ending. A new age, the age of gods and choices, had just begun. Chapter 10 End.